discovered in brambles on the heath.
Police emergency, how can I help you?
He was found by a couple that were walking their dogs. They saw his dogs walking without anyone, and then as they approached the scene, they could see some blood on the ground and his body partly covered by some brambles just off the pathway. The police were called.
I just remember it was a Saturday, I was at home, and I just remember hearing these police sirens screaming through the village.
I didn't actually come till the afternoon and arrived here. So all these police cars, all these police cars around for us, but it's quite bizarre.
Rumours about the discovery of a body in undergrowth fly through the villages.
An initial assessment suggested that he may have been subject to an animal attack.
One early theory was an attack from an animal, and that was mainly led from the extent of the injuries. Obviously, there's Banham Zoo, not a huge distance away.
I was very sceptical of that because we know what's in the woods, and I can't think of a wild animal that had been over there to do such damage, to kill somebody. There isn't animals over there to do that.
The news spreads among the local dog walking community. Could a wild animal really have attacked and killed a man on their doorstep?
There was a sense of fear, but that kind of not really believing it was going on in the village.
I think it was a bit of a shock to everybody. It's not something that happens in this area. It certainly put us off walking our dogs there for a while. I had a young daughter at the time, she was only 3, and I wasn't keen on taking her there, you know.
Rookie journalist Zach Ward was one of the first to get wind of the story.
So at the time, I felt shocked, I felt surprised. This was my first job in journalism. It was our goal to try and handle it sensitively. The stories we normally covered at This Express were very community-based. They were human interest. It was about council tax going up. It was people's 100th birthdays. It was that level of local news. So when we say things like this don't happen, that's not a cliche, it's genuine. We had really very little experience in covering this major event.
Police finally identify the body in the woods as 83-year-old Peter Wrighton. But who is he?
Mr. Wrighton was retired. He lived with his wife. He had 2 dogs, one 13 and one 9 or 10 years old, that he walked regularly.
He had retired to Banham, which is about 5 miles as the crow flies to East Harling. He'd worked for BT for 35 years. He'd been married for 59 years, and he sounded like a gentle, kind, loving man. Loved his dogs. He was walking with Gemma and Dylan at the time, and they both stayed with the body, which I think that tells you the bond between dog and owner. But he sounded like a really well-respected member of the community, and we got an outpouring of tributes and sympathy once his name had been released.
The first time we moved in, we went and introduced ourselves to the neighbours. Peter and Anne were very, very welcoming. One of our first things to do was to invite them over for a meal.
They were always friendly. You go over there, they're always welcome to. And obviously they used to take their dogs out for a walk, both of them. And they loved dogs, so they took in a lot of rescue dogs.
Father of 2, Peter was a daily visitor with his 2 dogs to the heath, just a few miles from his home in Banham. Tragically, on the morning of his death, his wife Anne had gone in search of him when he hadn't returned home.
Been shopping, and on my way back, I was driving by, and Anne pulled out her car and drove towards Harling. I thought that was rather unusual for her to go out and leave the house empty without them being out together. I didn't think much more of it than that.
Mr. Wrighton had failed to return home, and Mrs. Wrighton became concerned and actually drove out to the heath to look for her husband in case possibly he'd had a medical event or become lost. As she approached the scene, she made herself known to the police, who were already there.
While Peter's wife is escorted home, his body is taken for a post-mortem examination to verify the cause of death.
When the post-mortem took place, it was established that he had received quite a violent attack, probably initially from behind. Many of the stabbing injuries were to the back of his neck and a cut across his throat that actually cut all the way back to the spinal column. May have taken 4 or 5 sideways cuts. It almost severed his head. There were other significant injuries, a stab wound that went into his left eye.
The result immediately changes the course of the investigation.
We had a phone call from Anne informing us that Peter had been murdered.
But what had gone on? Why would someone want to kill such a well-respected member of the community in such a violent way? In the quaint countryside of East Harling, a post-mortem examination has just revealed that far from being killed by a wild animal, much-loved pensioner Peter Wrighton had been murdered. But why?
I think someone may have put a suggestion forward that it could have been as a result of an animal attack. But when you consider the circumstances, it would appear the way he had been deposited, he had been dragged backwards and his arms were on top of him, which would be unlikely if he was pulled there by an animal.
Mr. Wrighton had been stabbed over 40 times, including some very deep wounds to his throat, which had almost severed his head from the rest of his body.
It was a violent and aggressive attack with only one outcome likely with the way that he was attacked.
Immediately, a murder investigation is launched to track down the killer. And everyone is a potential suspect.
This was the biggest manhunt for a long, long time.
We've got additional officers in the local area at the scene of the murder. We've also increased our patrols and our police visible presence in and around East Harling.
They were very present, patrolling up and down the road. There was mounted police going around the village on horseback.
At the back of the forest here, the police stopped me all the cars and asking you, what, were you on that day, were you here, taking your name, address and so forth.
Police officers involved in the investigation will have been looking for dog walkers in the area. People have routines and return to places quite regularly, and therefore they will also have people on the heath at the same time, the same day, several days after, to pick up those who regularly go and may have been there in the morning.
As the police were searching the crime scene here, they cut all the grass down really short. All this field was cut very short. All the hedgerow here was cut down to virtually nothing. I guess they're looking for the weapon, I guess.
As news spreads throughout the local dog walking community that there's a killer at large, so does the fear.
When the murder investigation started, nobody was walking the dogs over the woods. They didn't know who it was.
When people first found out about the murder, then I think it was one of complete disbelief that something like that had happened in the area. And then I think probably naturally mixed in with a bit of fear around who was this person that had committed the crime, and were they still at large?
I mean, this was in broad daylight. This was at 10:30 in the morning, potentially. So I think afterwards people were wary. I think people were wary about walking their dogs on their own.
Police established that the 5th of August 2017 started out like any other day for Peter Wrighton.
It was a very typical day for him. He'd been to the shop earlier, he was walking his dogs.
Peter was picked up on CCTV at a local shop at 9:57 a.m. His car was spotted at 10:14 a.m, heading to the heathland to walk his 2 dogs. 30 minutes later, his body was discovered.
Police emergency, how can I help you?
Mr. Wrighton's wallet was still on him. His car keys were still with him, making it unlikely that it was a robbery. The Heath really is a friendly area that people go for relaxation and just to walk dogs and just to get out and get some fresh air, etc. It's not somewhere where you would expect this level of violence.
Another potential theory was around other uses of the area. One dog walker who had used the area quite regularly had mentioned to police that he thought there was suspicious activity involving drugs and people buying drugs around that area.
Police quickly rule out a robbery gone wrong. So who would want to cause this quiet, friendly pensioner harm?
The majority of murders occur between people who know each other. And so an initial line of inquiry would be to establish those people who know him and anyone who may have any sort of grudge or dislike or whatever for Mr. Wrighton. You tend to work in concentric circles around the victim, and so you look very close and then you gradually branch out and expand your inquiry, eliminating people as you go.
Peter was quite reserved, he was quite quiet, because he was such a kind, gentle soul, and happily married to Anne. It didn't make any sense. How could somebody be so wicked? Do you pick on somebody so kind, so loving?
His son and daughter live away and could be easily established as not having been in the Norfolk area, so that would eliminate those family members. And therefore the police then need to look further outside the family unit and expand their inquiries.
You know, we tried to think about people that knew all of us. Could it be anybody that we knew?
Any other significant friendships or relationships before his move to the area?
And we came up with no's everywhere, so it had to be random.
With no obvious clues in Peter's past, police turned to the media and the public for help.
If members of the public have any information at all, even if people think this is a small snippet of information, tell us, because it might be a small bit of information that's the final pieces of a jigsaw that we need. We're really, really keen for anybody that was in and around the area between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. on Saturday the 5th of August. This was an 83-year-old family man. It was a brutal attack with no known motive at this time, leaving behind a wife and children.
Another major line of inquiry is through the media to try to gain intelligence from and identify members of the public who may have been in the area at the time.
The police had appealed for information, and the initial amount of people coming forward with information was really, really high. We're talking about the hundreds.
It's important you get to people as soon as possible so that that image is as clear as possible in their minds.
Intensive questioning of local dog walkers starts to give police some leads.
The day of the murder, I came up the second day and the policeman said to me, "What are you doing here?" basically. I was a little bit scared because I thought perhaps maybe they would think it was me, because my footprints would be on the soil here and everything, and touch certain things, I guess, so forth. DNA, that sort of stuff, I guess. I don't know how that kind of works, but quite scary at the time.
Didn't sink in at first. And then when they're talking about, it happened such and such, and I thought, well, I was in the forest then.
So as part of the appeals, initially the police were wanting to speak to 2 male individuals and gave very detailed descriptions.
Police rule out the 2 dog walkers. But Peter Bibby is pulled in for questioning.
I had an interview at work, an interview at home, where they took all fingerprints, DNA. That's it.
Good boy.
They even took DNA off the dog, took all my clothes.
Good boy.
Yeah, it's quite harrowing, but I suppose everybody's a suspect till you're proven innocent.
But unknown to Peter, something he had witnessed on the morning of the 5th of August was about to turn the investigation on its head.
It was a normal day over the heath. Met quite a few new people, which was quite nice. A few of the people that I used to know. Yeah, just a really nice, peaceful day. Yeah, this is the route that I took. I regularly walk this ridge, and this gate wasn't there at the time. So I would come along here, and then I turned down, then walked back through the woods and around circle. Saw somebody walking towards us, and it just didn't look right. He wasn't dressed for walking in the forest. He didn't have a dog. He wasn't with anybody else. It was just totally out of sync.
Through their inquiries, they identified another person who'd been dog walking on the heath at the time, who had spoken to someone who seemed out of place. Didn't seem to be dressed to be walking, didn't have a dog. You know, dog walkers tend to, it's not a uniform they wear, but they tend to dress in similar ways and know who looks in or out of place.
On his feet, he had like heavy-duty flip-flops and a pair of shorts and a T-shirt. Very smartly dressed and was totally out of character for walking dogs in the forest. We were both walking up wheel ruts of a car. So I was walking up the right-hand one, he was coming down the left-hand one. When we actually passed, he was about this far away from me. I could have put my hand out and touched him. If I hadn't said hello to him, he'd have definitely walked past me and wouldn't have given me the time of day. There was no chance of any eye contact, not even any fainted little glances. He had his head forward and he was just walking forward and ignoring everything. And then he went on, and then I was wondering to myself, what's he doing? Where's he going? It's not right.
He provided an e-fit of this person that became very key to the investigation later on.
I do regret not following him to see where he went. Yeah. And that's sort of like bugged me for a while.
Suddenly, police have a description of a man they believe could hold the key as to what went on that morning on the heathland. They release an e-fit. But who is this man? And is he a killer? The rural Norfolk countryside is still reeling 6 days after 83-year-old Peter Wrighton was murdered on the heathland while walking his dog.
Shocking events such as these have a significant impact on the community. One of the first things the local police inspector will do is a community impact assessment to try and reach out to the community and reassure them that the police are doing as much as they can to protect them and to resolve whatever the incident is that has happened.
Such a shock for this area because it's so safe and so sort of old-fashioned in a way. I guess you leave your doors unlocked, you have keys in your car, and no one expects you to get murdered. It's just quite bizarre. Afterwards, people are quite scared of walking the dogs in the forest.
Police still have no suspects, no murder weapon, and no motive.
I think any time there has been a murder in these sort of circumstances and no one's been found, there's likely to be wariness, there's likely to be some people who sadly won't want to leave their house. That shock was always there, I think. It was random, it was unprovoked, it literally could happen to anybody.
It wasn't safe for any of us. If there's a murderer already, it's murdered Peter. Was it something personal or not? We didn't know. After the murder of Peter, I was very reluctant to leave the house.
Having turned to the public for help, police receive information about a man who had stood out on the heath on the morning of the murder.
I just saw his feet first, and I thought he's wearing like heavy-duty flip-flops. It's not the sort of attire that you'd think of going dog walking. Pair of shorts on. Most people don't wear shorts through there because of the nettles, bits of bracken and all sorts of stuff like that. He was walking with a purpose.
Police release an e-fit of the man described, and suddenly there's a breakthrough. Police receive a tip-off about a local man, 24-year-old Alexander Palmer.
So, following the police appeal was a psychiatrist who had worked with Alexander Palmer, then came forward with some concerns around previous things that Palmer had said.
The psychologist told the police that when treating Alexander Palmer, he had ideations of violent attacks, often with a knife.
Palmer had talked about his desire to attack random people. The voice in his head he called Little Alex.
Once Alexander Palmer was known to the inquiry, he was allocated to a team of detectives as a person of interest. Having obtained a photograph from Facebook, it was immediately apparent that there was a very strong likeness with the e-fit that had been provided by one of the dog walkers.
So at the time we knew that Palmer was 24 years old and he lived in Cringleford in Norfolk, and he had previously been a part of the armed forces.
Having identified Alexander Palmer as a suspect, an arrest strategy was prepared and he was arrested at 4:40 the following morning.
News of the arrest quickly spreads.
I wasn't sleeping. Quite paranoid about it all. Always kept looking at my iPad, to see if there'd been any updates. And I think there's one at 3 o'clock in the morning, the first published Alexander's name. So quickly thought I'd have a look at Facebook. And lo and behold, there he was. As soon as I saw him on Facebook, I realised that was him. Without a shadow of a doubt.
After Alexander was arrested, they'd informed Anne, and Anne informed us that someone had been arrested for it, which was a relief for us.
As part of the arrest strategy, having been brought into custody, various forensic samples and a DNA swab will have been taken from Palmer, which will have been fast-tracked to the laboratory to try to get a profile as soon as possible. Having an outstanding profile from Mr. Wrighton's trousers, they need to know as soon as possible whether there could be any link to Alexander Palmer.
With forensic evidence being processed, Palmer himself is brought in for questioning.
Alex, can I get you to introduce yourself, please? Alexander Hobbs Palmer. As I said, an e-fit was prepared from a description. Have a look at that. What would you say about that? That's a pretty good likeness.
Alexander admitted that he had been in the area at the time.
During the first interview, Palmer revealed that he had been in the area. He said that he had travelled there and feeling depressed, he had stood there and had cried to himself and had walked about and then returned to his car, parked somewhere separately and had another walk and then left the area.
He was quite adamant about it, that he had not done it. He was not the killer. There was a Roman road that dissected the wood. Mr. Wrighton had been killed on the west side of the road. Alexander said that he'd been on the east side at all times. I found him to be pretty calm, composed. He was intelligent.
Despite Palmer's denials, on the ground, detectives worked tirelessly to find evidence to link him to the crime.
You're looking for something that will link him to the scene, something that will link him to Mr. Wrighton. So you're going to look for any clothes that have been worn at any locations that he's been to, so a house, lockup, work, vehicles that he may have used, looking to seize as many items as possible to initially assess them and then send them for forensic examination.
And it isn't long before forensic investigations start to produce results.
It was the second day of interviews that the positive result on the DNA matching Alexander Palmer to the DNA profile found on the trousers, probably where he dragged Mr. Wrighton into the bushes, grabbing his trousers to pull him along.
What could be his DNA was found on Mr. Wrighton's trousers, and what could have been Mr. Wrighton's blood was found on the collar of a jacket that belonged to Alexander.
That was the main evidence to link Alexander Palmer to Peter Wrighton, and obviously that then entered into the interview strategy.
Can you explain to me why your DNA is on that man?
I'm afraid I can't without knowing.
You don't need to know. It's irrelevant where it is. You say you haven't met him. Why is your DNA on him?
For instance, I could have lost a hair follicle and caught on his shoe. That's just me speculating, but without knowing, I couldn't venture a guess.
Okay.
Police now have a DNA link between the two men, but need further proof linking Palmer to the crime.
A search of his car identified a map which had markings on it indicating the area of the heath, which is obviously of interest because it indicates some sort of pre-planning before going to the scene.
There was ANPR data, the number plate recognition, which put Palmer at the location at the day of the murder.
Some ANPR evidence had been recovered with Palmer driving his car in the morning when dropping his partner off in the city, which showed him apparently in a white or light-coloured shirt, and when he was seen picking her up in the afternoon, he was seen in a dark-coloured shirt. And yet his account was that he had been wearing the same clothes all day, but he appeared to have changed his clothing, and none of that clothing, which is highly likely to have been heavily bloodstained, was ever recovered.
Police believe they have irrefutable proof that Palmer killed Peter Wrighton, but they still don't know why or what with, and their suspect is now refusing to talk.
I'll ask you again, were you involved in the murder of Peter Wrighton? No comment.
He made it very clear that he was not guilty, was not responsible, and he hadn't done the killing. And that remained his position throughout.
Detectives analyse Palmer's phone records and come across a damning photograph.
It was established that he had bought a hunting-type knife, and in fact there was a picture of it, I think, on his phone. That picture of the knife was shown to the forensic pathologist, who confirmed that it could have caused the injuries.
Alexander Palmer is charged with murder. But what was his motive? And what drove him to kill? February 2018. And Alexander Palmer is standing trial at Nottingham Crown Court, accused of murdering Peter Wrighton in August 2017. A crime which had sent shockwaves through the small, close-knit community of East Harling.
I think my first initial thought was, whoever done this is a coward. The nature of the frenzy that murderer did, it was a cowardly act on an old man who's out walking dogs.
Totally shocked. I couldn't believe it because it's such a quiet and peaceful place. It just seemed incredible it could happen here. It just seemed impossible, really.
Prior to the court case, Palmer has to undergo psychological assessments to determine his capacity to stand trial.
I believe he's initially sent to Belmarsh Prison and then to Rampton for that assessment. And the question to be answered was Alexander Palmer mad or bad? Had he carried out this attack because of a mental illness that he was suffering from, or was he just a very violent and nasty person?
So who is Alexander Palmer?
When I first met Alexander, he was 24 years old. He'd been 23 at the time of the offence. He had no previous convictions, no cautions, no findings of guilt, no reprimands, nothing, so far as the police were concerned, that would suggest that he would commit such a violent offence. He'd served in the British Army till about 2015. He had trained and qualified as a commando, one of the few who actually qualified in his year. But there was one thing of note. In March of 2014, a fellow trainee had stamped on his head, and that was plainly the beginning of his mental problems. Because of that, he had been medically discharged from the army.
Throughout 2015, Palmer was treated as both an inpatient and an outpatient in mental health services, seen by several different psychologists, but one expressed concern to the police after seeing media appeals about the murder.
One of the people that contacted the control room was a psychologist who had worked previously with Palmer following an assault on Palmer whilst he was serving in the forces that had an effect on him.
And one piece of information comes to light which is particularly chilling.
The psychologist told the police that he had a dislike for dog walkers.
Dog walkers, he said, were a particular bugbear of his.
He was obviously suffering some mental health problems brought on by PTSD. He had some kind of grievance with dog walkers is the thing that stands out.
He had made disclosures about ideations around violence and a dislike of dog walkers.
Having been deemed fit to stand trial, the court hears how Alex had revealed on arrest that he heard voices in his head.
Palmer had talked about the voice in his head he called Little Alex.
Is there a different Alex? Times, yes. Okay, who's he? He used to manifest himself as a physical hallucination, but now it's just a voice. Is he still with us? Yes. Is he here today? Yes. Where is he now? What is him here? He's there, is he?
Palmer admits being on the Heathlands on the day of the murder.
So was Alex there that day? The other Alex? He's always there, so he's always there. So he would have been with you, okay? Was he? Do you remember him talking to you on that day? You don't. But you say he talks to you every day. Yes. He's there laughing at you. But you say he doesn't tell you what to do. Doesn't force you to do things or anything like that.
Palmer, during the court case, had said that he had visited the woodland because he was feeling low, but didn't say that he'd been involved in the attack.
But the prosecution puts forward evidence linking Palmer to Peter Wrighton.
Several of Mr. Wrighton's clothes were sent for forensic examination, and they had identified DNA from a person on the leg of his trousers.
I believe there was DNA found on Mr. Wrighton as well, which linked Palmer to the murder.
The court also hears that on the morning of the murder, ANPR cameras picked up Palmer's black Ford Focus on the A11, heading towards the Heath. Mobile phone records reveal he is stationary on the area of the Heath from 10:19 a.m. for a period of 32 minutes and 55 seconds. His car is then picked up heading north on the A11. The whole journey, police believe, had been planned in advance.
A search of his car identified a map with the area marked out.
In fact, investigations reveal Palmer had completed the exact same journey 2 weeks prior to the murder. Had it been a practice run, or had he intended to kill on that day? Either way, it was Peter who found himself at the end of Palmer's wrath on that fateful day.
Why did you pick Peter?
Being that Peter's about my stature and a bit older than I am, Peter was easy prey for Alexander.
But did Peter actually try to help this man? We don't know. Nobody will ever know. Because this man won't say anything now. Did Peter try to help him? Peter suffered for it. We don't know.
It was also revealed that despite his age and smaller stature, Peter had tried to fight off his attacker.
He had what we would refer to as defensive marks on his hand. It would appear that he tried to grab the blade of the knife to stop his assailant.
It was unprovoked, and he was a very, very old man that couldn't defend himself. Alexander's quite a strong lad, you know, military background, very fit and able. Peter Wrighton could hardly stand up. I think very cowardly.
The prosecution revealed further evidence that Palmer had planned to kill. Police had found a notebook in a storage facility belonging to Palmer, in which it appeared he had written of his plans.
So in January of 2015, he said he was thinking of going for dog walkers. He said that he hated dog walkers and that if he did this, he would be up on a pedestal, up with the big ones. Everyone would look up to him. Everyone would know his name.
But while police did discover the notebook, there's one thing they never did find: the knife he used to kill Peter.
The prosecution case would be the steps that he had taken to get rid of any forensic evidence would indicate a knowledge of what he had done and an intention to cover up what he had done.
On the advice of his barrister, Palmer does not give evidence in his trial.
I explained to him that it's his case, his future, his liberty that's at stake, and that we act as a voice for him in the courtroom.
The notebook, DNA, witness statements, and the e-fit, as well as Palmer's medical records, are put to the court.
The prosecution case was a strong one. ANPR evidence in relation to his vehicle and cell site evidence in relation to his phone showed that he had been in the area at the relevant time. In addition to that, there was evidence from 2 eyewitnesses who had given descriptions of the person who was likely to have been Mr. Wrighton's attacker. And those descriptions were quite similar to the appearance of Alexander. One of those 2 witnesses had made an e-fit, and again, the e-fit was quite similar to Alexander's appearance. There was no direct evidence, but if you put all those matters together, it represents quite a strong case.
Having heard all the evidence, the jury retire to consider their verdict.
The trial came to a conclusion and the jury found Alexander Palmer guilty of murder.
When a jury decides after 49 minutes, I think there's obviously overwhelming evidence to suggest that Palmer was the person who carried out the murder. That was the one thing that stood out for me at the trial, is how quickly they decided that Palmer was guilty of the murder.
Despite evidence of Palmer's mental health problems, the judge ruled that he had meticulously planned the murder.
The statutory sentence is life imprisonment, but there is a recommendation from the judge, which in this case was 28 years. I would suggest that the fact that once convicted and imprisoned, he was sent to a normal prison rather than a psychiatric prison indicates that the assessment was that he was a violent and nasty person.
Good girl, good girl. Come on.
The dog walkers of East Harling will never forget the horrifying crime which leaves its mark on this close-knit community.
It's not the same in the forest here for months. People were not relaxed, they're very nervous, looking over the shoulder all the time. I was doing the same, actually, looking over your shoulder, seeing what cars were parked here. It was very bizarre, kind of chilling feeling afterwards.
And for Peter Bibby, his brush with evil will live with him forever.
It was quite a scary thing, and it's all the what ifs. What if I had gone back? You know, would have changed things. I was walking straight forward to him. It could have been me.
Investigate an infamous case stage by stage to appreciate the full picture in OJ Made in America, available now on Sky Documentaries.
The following programme contains descriptions of real-life violence that some viewers may find distressing. Please be aware that this programme also contains themes of domestic violence.
When a murder happens, it's very rare and it sends real shockwaves through the community.
It was like something out of a film that you would never see in your local street. What kind of person would actually do that?
The way in which she was disposed of is just utterly disgusting. The investigation had to be her voice. She wasn't there to say what happened to her.
It was quite clear the complete devastation that had been caused by the death of their daughter.
He's a manipulator. He's just a cold-hearted killer.
Just 16 miles south of Birmingham, but nestled in the rolling hills of Worcestershire, lies Bromsgrove.
Bromsgrove is a peaceful place and it's very tranquil.
Not much here. Not much really happens.
There's quite a village feel to it because it's surrounded by countryside and it's got country pubs, it's got a nice canal.
It's got a lovely community. They're all very friendly.
They know their neighbours and help each other out.
I've left several times. I always end up coming back home.
It's where your heart is, really.
In the beating heart of Bromsgrove live the Salangis.
Nizam and Zubaydah lived in Talbot Road in Bromsgrove. Nice estate. And it has a row of shops. And in that row of shops was Nizam and Zubaydah's takeaway pizza business, Prego Pizza. It was owned by Nizam. Zubaydah would help and serve behind the counter.
And it was plainly quite a popular place for local residents to go to.
I don't know what they did with them pizzas, but their pizzas were really nice.
Zubaydah was very attractive. I took quite a shine to her. She'd just got this aura about her which sort of drew you in with her smile.
Nizam was very talkative. We had quite a few conversations with him. They seemed a very nice couple, very pleasant.
Nizam and Zubaydah are also proud members of the local Afghan community. They have 2 young children, one 6, the other just 4 years old.
She went about her daily life as best she could, loved her kids. They were the centre of her world.
She was a devoted mother, and the family life was everything for her.
But life in Talbot Road is about to change forever.
Hello, police. Nizam contacted West Mercia Police to report Zubaydah missing.
At the time, Nizam said that his wife had gone out for a run and never returned.
Nizam also reveals something else to police.
There were a number of texts on his phone that reported to have come from Zubaydah. One which said something along the lines of, I love someone else, I want to pass my time with them. Zubaydah had left him and she had told him via text that she was going back to Afghanistan. She couldn't cope in the UK, didn't want to remain here, and of course had mentioned another man in her life.
Nizam had shown the texts to a friend at his mosque.
The gentleman concerned told Nizam that he should call the police and let them know that Zubaydah was missing, which of course he did.
But leaving her children behind seems at odds with devoted mother Zubaydah. Police launch a missing person inquiry.
Missing persons reports are taken very seriously, particularly when they are out of character. That inquiry would have been passed to a response officer via a patrol sergeant, and there are a template of inquiries that would have taken place in response to trying to find out where Zubaydah was.
The police will investigate places known to Zubaydah Salangi. So, for example, they would go to addresses that they know that she would go to. They would speak to people that she is associated with, just to see whether or not there is any information whatsoever that can help them locate Zubaydah.
There would also have been the local inquiries being conducted, house-to-house inquiries. Are there any footprints where they would normally be or not?
Investigators focus on Zubaydah's street, where she was reportedly last seen going for a run.
When she was first reported missing, we were at home because we had a knock on the door from the police asking if we had seen her. The police asked us if we had any dashcam footage of their house. The police have took our SD card from the car, and obviously there was no footage on there. But apart from that, I found it to be a bit strange that she went missing. It was just very strange.
The police shortly after did put out a press release to the media saying, could we report that she was missing and if anybody had information about it, and it was front page news in Bromsgrove. I wrote articles on it at the time. She was a young mother of two and somebody who was well known in the area, and it seemed a surprise that she would suddenly disappear. It didn't seem to make sense, and a lot of people were interested in it and worried about her as well.
I was going through social media. It said that Zubaydah had gone missing on the Sunday. The neck hairs stood up. In my heart, I knew something terrible had happened. I commented on that post, a lovely woman, I hope she's found safe.
The reasons behind it just don't seem clear. It seemed like a bit of a mystery for the area, and especially as a lot of people had only seen her a few days before serving up pizzas in the takeaway.
There was no trace of Zubaydah anywhere, of course, apart from the text messages.
Detectives start investigating Zubaydah's links overseas.
Zubaydah Salangi was an Afghan national, and she was one of 8 children who lived in the Hindu Kush region mountains just outside of Kabul.
So Zubaydah was born in 1991 in Afghanistan. She was raised there with her extended family, brothers, sisters, aunties, uncles, obviously her parents. She qualified as a maths teacher and actually worked in a school in Afghanistan.
And she was a highly educated woman and had aspirations.
Zubaydah came to the UK as a result of her marriage to Nizam Salangi. That was an arranged traditional marriage between the families. And Zubaydah came to the UK to be with Nizam in around 2013.
She carried on wanting to learn, and she was going to evening classes to do English at college.
She had a really strong work ethic, not only from working at Prego Pizza, but her desire and drive to help other people in terms of education. And it was ultimately to be her dream that she would work in the education system in the United Kingdom.
Investigators are puzzled. Inquiries reveal Zubaydah making a go of life in Britain. But her missing persons report suggests she's not happy with her life here.
And straight away, when you get a missing person inquiry like that, where it is totally out of character, that raises red flags. You just get that feeling that something is just not right.
Police start to scour the family home.
A search of the property would be conducted with the consent of the owner. That is standard in missing person inquiries. Checking loft spaces, etc., just to make sure that that individual isn't actually where they should be at home.
Nizam Salangi took police to show her wardrobe and an 8-inch gap in her clothes rail where she had taken clothing and left.
And there were 2 handwritten notes to the children explaining why she's left.
Police officers attended Prego Pizza and they searched the rear of the premises.
It was searched by a pulsar, which is a number of officers who are specifically trained. They're licensed search officers. One of their major skills is searching, detailed searching, leave no void unexplored.
They searched, in particular, a storage area where there were many boxes.
In the rear storeroom, concealed on a shelf, which could only be accessed via stepladders, we found a purse which had been secreted behind a load of pizza packing boxes. That was Zubaydah's purse. In that purse was her driving licence, some photographs of her children, and some cash.
It was something they felt that she wouldn't have left behind if she'd actually run off with somebody else.
In that same area, in a cavity within the wall space, was an iPhone box, a mobile phone box, wrapped in bubble wrap. And in there was a phone that subsequently transpired to be used by Zubaydah to contact her family in Afghanistan.
That was a real pivotal moment for the police investigation.
It became quite obvious that something was severely wrong.
In Bromsgrove, mother of 2, Zubaydah Salangi, has been missing for nearly a week. As investigators continue searching the takeaway business she runs with her husband Nizam, word spreads across the local community.
I actually took it upon myself to drive past Prego Pizza because I'd been so upset. I didn't know what had happened, and I saw forensic vans, people in white suits carrying trays from Prego Pizza and putting them into the van. At that point, I think I knew that something is wrong.
Investigators start analysing their discoveries at the premises, Zubaydah's phone and her driving licence.
It's a very significant find because Zubaydah wasn't yet in possession of a British passport, so her driving licence would have been absolutely key for her as a form of identification. And of course, if she was going to leave, why would she leave images of her children who were very dear to her, as you would expect, at home and not take them with her? And then of course, her one means of contacting her family, that phone, was massively significant because that was her only support network, her contact with her family in Afghanistan.
By now, police have also spoken to Zubaydah's family overseas.
It's very clear that she was someone who was very loved indeed by her family. Such was that love that they would regularly contact each other every single day.
Officers made contact with Mr. Valzadar, Zubaydah's father, in Afghanistan, and it became apparent that he'd not heard from his daughter since the 27th of March.
And that was really unusual because she was so family orientated. So if Zubaydah was planning to leave the country and go home, then her family would have been the first people that she contacted, and they would know that she was on her way. So the fact that they hadn't heard from her was really distressing.
The police would have understandably been very concerned at this stage because, having been shown by Nizam Salangi part of her wardrobe missing, text messages purportedly from her indicating that she had left him and the family. But in fact, having searched Prego Pizza, they discovered something completely different. So suspicions quickly turned on Nazim Salangi.
People in the local community are also questioning Nazim's claims.
It was common knowledge that Nizam had said she'd gone out for a jog on the Sunday and not come back.
Thought there's no way she would have been out jogging. No way. Because we never seen her apart from school runs, going to work, coming back from work. That's the only time I would see her. Definitely not for a jog.
Who goes out for a jog, leaving your children? Personally, myself, I never left my children in that situation. So that did not ring true at all.
On social media, there were a lot of questions. I think there was a lot of disbelief that she would have actually left the country. She seemed that she was quite settled here and she had a family, and it didn't seem to make sense.
Detectives soon discover something sinister about the seemingly happy couple.
For customers at the pizza parlour, they'd just see the couple behind the counter who were friendly and chatty, and it seemed like a normal marriage. A few people who got closer to them did comment that there were signs that maybe things behind closed doors weren't so happy.
I'd always try and make conversation, try and get Zubaydah to sort of look at me, you know. She was a very shy person, but I think as I came to know them as a couple, there were a few red flags that I picked up on during my visits there. I noticed every time I spoke to Zubaydah, Nizam would stop what he was doing and turn his head, and she would sort of crumble, go very quiet, look away, and not acknowledge that I was there. And she would sort of like fade into the background. I had feeling that she wanted to communicate more, but felt she couldn't. And I'd commented to my husband a few times that I felt he was controlling her. I'm a survivor of domestic abuse. I ended up fleeing to a women's refuge. And one of the things they teach you there is how to recognise a manipulator.
It was a relationship that was plagued with lots of troubles. She would regularly argue with Nizam.
I don't think it was a happy marriage. I sensed that Zubaydah felt extremely trapped by the culture that she'd married into. Trapped by the fact that she loved her kids and would do anything for them and would not leave for that reason. There was clearly some abuse, which was reflected in numerous phone calls between Zubaydah and her family back in Afghanistan. She would contact them regularly. Her family would tell us that she would often speak of her unhappiness and her physical and emotional abuse within her marriage at the hands of Nizam.
Zubaydah's friend Samantha confirms investigators' worst fears.
I told them I'd noticed a few red flags. The next thing, they asked me if they could come and take a statement from me, which they did do. And I said, one time I went in with my husband and I looked at Zubaydah as I was stood waiting, and I noticed that she got a black eye. It looked like she'd covered it up with some foundation. It was purple and black. And I spoke to her. I asked her what she had done. All the time, Nizam was glaring at her and said basically she'd banged it on the cooker hood. I didn't believe her immediately. I did not believe her. I was talking to my husband as we left the shop, and I said, I believe he's done that. I think he's going to end up killing her.
As the inquiry moved on, his willingness to assist began to dwindle, which also, of course, arose suspicions with the investigating officers.
Part of the investigation process by the police into this missing persons inquiry involved them looking at bank accounts, and they discovered that there had been transactions on one of her accounts in various locations.
Detectives spot transactions made after Zubaydah reportedly went missing.
These were cash withdrawals in Birmingham. So, of course, CCTV inquiries are conducted at those cash points to see if we can establish who is withdrawing that cash.
And when they viewed that CCTV footage, they saw a figure who they believed to be Nizam Salangi. Understandably, the police would have been very suspicious of this, given what Nizam Salangi had previously told them, that she had run away with another man and wasn't coming back.
More significantly, an analysis of the phone data showed that the texts purportedly sent by Zubaydah from her phone to Nizam's phone were actually sent whilst her phone was in Bromsgrove.
This obviously led the police to be very suspicious indeed, and ultimately showed Nizam to be lying about Zubaydah having left the area.
We could tell from the location of Zubaydah's phone and the location of Nizam's phone at the time the text messages were sent that they were actually co-locating, and the phones were moving round together. So it couldn't have been Zubaydah who was sending those texts.
The police quickly concluded that Nizam Salangi had himself sent these messages using her mobile phone to message his phone.
He had actually been sending these texts to himself, pretending to be his wife.
It was clear that Nizam was fabricating a series of events to try and show some proof that Zubaydah was conducting her daily business, i.e. sending text messages, withdrawing money from the bank. We've got significant fines at Prego Pizza, the phone, the purse, and his unwillingness to cooperate with inquiries is amazingly suspicious and absolutely tipped the balance into something far more sinister or potentially likely a homicide.
With all this information, the police made the decision, and quite rightly, that a missing persons inquiry quickly became into a murder inquiry. And they attended Nizam's address on Talbot Road and arrested him on suspicion of murder.
In Bromsgrove, takeaway owner Nizam Salangi is in custody on suspicion of murdering his wife and mother of two, Zubaydah.
We learned that he'd been arrested, which was completely, massive shock.
At this point, we've gone from a missing person report to suspected murder, and that's huge in terms of how the community felt, but also what was being reported in the media. Murders were very rare in Bromsgrove, and it sent real shockwaves through the community.
From that day on, really, the whole street was swarmed with police cars, police vans, a massive tow truck to remove the cars.
It was headline news for us at the newspaper, and everyone wanted to know more about what could have led to this.
Most of the kind of like gossip that was going round was that they believed that Nizam had done something to her. And I think that just goes to show how many people kind of like had a feeling something was going on, like domestic abuse. Didn't want to voice their opinions. I thought horrendous thoughts that he had killed her, and thoughts as to what I could have done differently. Was there anybody I could have gone and told?
Once you've decided to make an arrest, straight away the clock is ticking in respect of your ability and the time you have to deal with that individual you've got in custody. There's a lot of pressure on an SIO and their team to make ground as fast and as best as they can.
Investigators seize their suspect's mobile. What they find on it confirms what the family have told them.
Nizam had captured a video on his mobile phone. There'd clearly been a domestic argument on the 27th of March. The children were present in the house. It was clearly very emotional. They were arguing in Afghan.
In that argument, Zubaydah was holding a kitchen knife to her wrist in what was plainly a complete act of desperation. She was, by this stage, terribly unhappy in the relationship that she was in.
And threatening to self-harm, and locks herself in the bathroom. During it, she yells at him that he'd destroyed her life for the last 8 years, which is how long they'd been married.
And basically saying to him, you carry on filming, you know, you've made me so unhappy. And of course, Nizam was keen for people to see that.
Under questioning, Nizam maintains his story, that his wife has fled their marital home.
I think Nizam was keen that video represented that Zubaydah was suffering from some kind of mental health episode or was very desperate, and therefore the fact that she may have gone missing may have come as no surprise.
But analysts find even more interesting activity on Nizam's phone, recorded the day after their violent argument.
On the 28th of March, Nizam, his brother Ramin and his brother Yazin all commenced using 3 new phone numbers that had not previously been used before, which in itself is suspicious. 28th of March is the last time that anybody had ever seen or heard from Zubaydah, and she was never to be seen again.
One of the phones had only been activated for 48 hours and seemed to be a burner phone, and it raised suspicions over why somebody would do that at the same time that Zubaydah went missing.
Detectives now focus on Nizam's brothers and their movements that day.
Rahman and Yasin Salangi lived in Cardiff, but they worked in Caerphilly in a pizza takeaway. The police investigation turned to the pizza takeaway in Caerphilly, and that included examining the CCTV footage of what had been going on in the takeaway. That showed unusual and suspicious behaviour between Rahman and Yasin, both on mobile telephones, on the 28th of March.
Investigators trace calls being made to their brother Nizam, but this is the first time they have spoken to him all year.
CCTV footage revealed that shortly after 10 p.m, Yasin Salangi was seen to reach underneath a counter and retrieve a mobile phone that he handed to Rahman.
And as a result of that phone data inquiries, we could see that on the night of the 28th of March, Ramin actually travelled up from Newport and came to Bromsgrove and met with Nizam.
During questioning, Nizam comes up with an explanation.
He told the police that the reason why Rahman had come from Caerphilly down to Bromsgrove was because a part of the oven in Prego Pizza had broken, and that he had requested his brother to come down with a particular part to replace in the broken oven. In fact, there was nothing wrong with the oven whatsoever. So the police attention turned to Nizam Salangi to see exactly what he had been doing that day.
The 28th of March is really significant because we know on that day that Nizam was expecting a gent to come to the pizza shop. He actually contacted that gent and said, "Don't bother coming, I'm not opening the pizza shop," and gave an excuse along the lines of something was wrong with one of the pizza ovens and therefore business was not going to be conducted as usual. And of course that gent never came.
The police also spoke to one of the chefs who worked at Prego Pizza, and they established from him that in fact Nizam Salangi had cancelled the chef for that day.
Police uncover something else rather sinister about the 28th of March.
Part of the police inquiry revealed that a tenant who had been living up above in a flat in Prego Pizza had been contacted by Nizam Salangi.
We actually traced that individual and he confirms that Nizam actually called him on the 28th to see when he was coming back into the country. And again, this was really suspicious, taken together with the cancellation of the gent coming up on that day. He clearly wanted no one around to interfere with what he had to do.
Police now suspect this was the day Zubaydah was killed. And Ramin was called upon that evening to help his brother Nezim dispose of the body.
It was key to the investigation to know where Nizam and Ramin have gone during these hours where they're together in and around Bromsgrove. Crucial to those inquiries are CCTV. We knew they were in a white Nissan vehicle. Although you couldn't see the registration number of that vehicle, a similar vehicle was captured on numerous pieces of CCTV from various locations. It basically showed that vehicle travelling out of Bromsgrove towards an area called Lower Bentley. During the early hours of the morning, we were able to calculate that they were probably in or around the area of Lower Bentley for approximately 2.5 to 3 hours for the return journey into Bromsgrove. We had the phone that Nizam was carrying linking to the Wi-Fi at Prego Pizza, so we could time when they got back to that location. A short stop at Prego Pizza before going back out to Lower Bentley. Our hypothesis being that they've gone out to Lower Bentley, prepared an area for deposition disposal, they've come back into Bromsgrove, collected Zubaydah, gone back out to that area and disposed of her body.
But finding Zubaydah's body is a different story. Limited mobile coverage in rural Worcestershire makes it harder to track the suspect's phones.
You are entering a massively rural area. It's huge. Fields, farms, canals, all stretching along the side of the motorway. We were unable to pinpoint exactly where they'd been, so it became a priority to sectorise that vast area and methodically, day by day, put officers through that area on foot with dogs. Huge operation, massively time-consuming.
The police started searching the area. It was noticeable that they were looking out in the countryside, and that spread like wildfire, and people started to question whether actually she'd been buried somewhere.
There were about 20 police, 10 on either side of the lane, with long sticks, were sweeping through the side of the road, trying to see if there was anything in there in the hedges. And then the drones, when they came, were up in the opposite direction down there, and they were just searching in the fields all around.
It's really, really frustrating because you know that you are generally in the right area, but you just don't know where exactly you need to be.
Suddenly, there's a breakthrough.
Just off a road called Copy Holt Lane, search officers came across what looked like a grave-shaped marking in the ground in a copse. It was a secluded area of woodland next to a lake. It also looked as if it had been disguised with branches and leaves, and of course they were extremely suspicious.
Investigators seal off the scene.
They'd got a car across the road blocking it off and were putting up, police tape around the area. It was clearly some sort of a crime scene.
To find that grave in our area of interest was highly significant. That's what we were looking for.
The police excavated this area of ground by hand, and they dug down to a natural level of clay.
But unfortunately, his body wasn't found there.
At this stage, the police were understandably frustrated by the fact that Zubaydah Salangi's body had not been found, despite them having dug what they thought to be her grave. So the task for the police was made more difficult. But with great care and determination, they put together all the evidence that they had to be able to put before the Crown Prosecution Service and a decision be made to charge Nizam Salangi with murder.
You may have convinced the CPS, but you've got to convince a jury beyond all reasonable doubt that he is guilty of that murder.
Bromsgrove takeaway owner Nizam Salangi has been charged with the murder of his missing 28-year-old wife, Zubaydah. But police still haven't found a body.
Just because Nizam had been charged, in some regards, with a no-body murder, the job has only just started.
Investigators home in on the role of Nizam's brother, Ramin.
When Ramin Salangi was arrested and interviewed by police, he initially spun the same tale as his brother did. But when the police confronted him with all the evidence that they had gathered, it was then that he began to tell the police more information. Zubaydah was dead and that she had hung herself.
And they'd brought the body down from the flat above, Prego Pizza, and put it into the back of Nizam's car.
He indicated the purpose of the trips out to Lower Bentley was to dispose of her body.
That was a real breakthrough moment for the police, because at that point, Nizam hadn't said anything about what happened.
As a result of his admission, Ramin Salangi is charged with assisting an offender. But to make their case watertight, police need to find Zubaydah. In August 2020, DCI Mark Peters is brought in to head up the investigation.
My absolute objective was to find Zubaydah. I feel like she almost becomes part of your life. I'd photograph of her on my phone. I would have sleepless nights. Absolutely all-consuming, because we just did not know where she was, and it was totally frustrating. So I decided to go to one of the pre-trial hearings at Worcester Crown Court. And that's the first time I'd seen Nizam and Ramin in the flesh. And I looked at them and I just thought, you two are anything but master criminals. And it just got me thinking, why would you go to the trouble of digging a grave, finding it not fit for purpose, then you'll fill that grave back in and go to the lengths they did to try and disguise it? So I canvassed a number of key individuals within the team. The opinion of the forensic archaeologist was that he was 98% sure from the crime scene photography that we were at the bottom of that grave from the first dig, and that 2% was just too much for me. I want to be 100% sure that we hadn't missed something at that location.
So the police went back and they decided to dig again at the exact spot they had before, at that makeshift grave.
And then went further, about 5 inches
And lo and behold, having done so, the police found the body of Zubaydah Salangi.
It was such a relief. It was very, very emotional, and it's a day I will never, ever forget.
The news spreads throughout Zubaydah's hometown.
When they found her, although it was very emotional, I was glad that they'd found her. For her family,
I just couldn't believe it. Shock, really. Just awful, absolutely awful.
I attended the post-mortem. Unfortunately, due to the passage of time that Zubaydah had remained in the grave, we were unable to establish an absolute cause of death. But we can establish very compelling evidence as to what had happened. She was wrapped in household bin bags. She was in a Primark duvet cover, which essentially formed a kind of sack tied with rope. The pillowcase of that duvet set had been located during a previous search at Talbot Road. Her feet were bound with a curtain wire, and when we went back to Talbot Road, there was one window at the front living room that had curtain wire that was absent.
This was a hugely significant find because obviously it gave a direct link from Zubaydah Salangi back to the home of Nazim.
The parting letters supposedly left by Zubaydah are also proven to be fakes.
We were able to prove, with the use of a handwriting expert, that in fact there is no way she could have written those letters.
This was a case that was filled with pieces of circumstantial evidence. And like a puzzle, those pieces in isolation didn't appear to be anything substantial. But when they were put together, it was very clear indeed to see the involvement of Nizam Salangi in the murder of Zubaydah.
"18 months after finding Zubaydah's body, her husband Nazim finally faces justice. He pleads not guilty to murder, and his brothers Ramin and Yasin plead not guilty to charges of assisting an offender.
I went to court and I testified. I felt like I had to be that voice for Zubaydah. Nizam had got his feet up. He didn't look bothered at all. He was just staring straight at me. I tried to avoid eye contact, but on the occasion that I looked at him, he was just smirking. And he didn't look regretful at all. The defence was quite gruelling. They tried to say that Zubaydah did in fact have a black eye, but that was years ago. And I said, no, it was 6 weeks before she went missing. So I just basically stood my ground. I had to be strong. I wanted to make sure she was not forgotten.
The prosecution reveals how the violent row captured on Nazim's smartphone the day before Zubaydah went missing was to be their last.
That night after he went to the pizza parlour, that she went on Facebook and unfriended him and his brothers and was searching for cleaning jobs.
To stop his wife from leaving him, Nazim decides on murder.
During the court case, the web of lies that Nizam had put together was completely unravelled. The prosecution showed that a lot of what he'd said just wasn't true, and piece by piece, it showed that he was just a heartless killer.
After a 7-week trial, the jury retires.
When the guilty verdicts came in, it was a feeling of huge relief.
Upon being found guilty, he became very vocal towards the officers in the case, essentially alleging that we'd fabricated evidence to stitch him up.
I think he thought he was going to get away with it. I felt glad that he's got what he deserves.
Nazim Solangi is jailed for a minimum of 18 years. Ramin Solangi sentenced to 6 years, and his brother Yasin for 4 years and 9 months.
Of course, it's the verdict we wanted, but it doesn't bring Zubaydah back.
The murder has also left its mark on Bromsgrove.
Even now, there's still times when people think about it, especially going past there in that precinct. And just to think that they had a killer in their community.
If I could speak to Zubaydah now, I think I'd rather go back in the past. Said, look, come with me. I'll take you somewhere, anywhere away from him. Because then she'd still be here. But I hope she's out there somewhere and she knows that I've done something for her.
If you have been affected by any of the issues raised in this programme, help is available online at sky.com/viewer support.
Nikki was not answering the door, was not answering the phone.
When she doesn't appear, people are surprised. She's usually very reliable.
I think it was just a shock because you don't expect that to sort of happen where you live.
Just unbelievable. It's like you're in a movie. It's not even happening to you.
Murder? What do you mean, murder?
When the police reviewed the CCTV footage, they saw a person entering the flats.
It's chilling. She's on her way to kill.
Letchworth, England's first garden city, is a rural town situated north of Hertfordshire.
Letchworth was founded by Ebenezer Howard at the start of the 20th century. He wanted people to move out of cramped conditions in places like London and come and live in the countryside.
Letchworth, for somewhere to live, is lovely, it's welcoming, it's rural, but within easy reach of both Cambridge and London. I'm getting older, but I still find it's a very safe place to walk around. I just feel it's a very comfy place to live.
I think people in Letchworth are really friendly. Often if you walk in, they'll say hello.
Life in Letchworth is really good. Everybody's very friendly, can be very vibrant through the summer months. Very nice place.
Letchworth is a lovely place to live. Very quiet, very nice, no trouble at all. Wouldn't live anywhere else. Beautiful place.
And for 26-year-old carer Nikki Collingbourne, it was the perfect place to live and work while remaining nearby to her family.
We were like best friends, really. Not so much, we used to make a joke about her being my auntie because she was younger than me, but we were just like really close friends, like sisters, really, because we were of a similar age. She always wanted children of her own, and I think that made her very childlike, but in a good way. And she worked with children as well, so. She's so good with kids, like, amazing, like, just seeing family, anyone's children, even their friends' kids, she was brilliant with. So obviously, as I started having my children, she became quite involved, and we'd often spend weekends together away, with kids, without kids. She's just such a kind person.
Nikki was very funny, caring and loving. Everything about her. She was just a wonderful person. She'd drop anything to do anything for anybody.
Nikki's close family circle depended on her in their daily lives, and that included helping her mum and taking her to and from hospital appointments. But all that was about to change.
Nikki's mother was very ill. She was being treated in the Lister Hospital in Stevenage, which is about 7 miles away. Nikki's due to collect her, and when she doesn't appear, people are surprised.
Nikki usually does all the running around, goes and picks her mum up, makes sure she's got everything, and she had not answered her calls, which was obviously very unlike Nikki.
Nikki would never let anybody down on an appointment, never, unless it was absolute emergency.
By the afternoon, I was a bit really worried, so I just sent her a text and I just said, Nikki, if you need me, I'm here, blah, blah, and yeah. And then the next thing I know, her mum had rung me and said, have you seen Nikki? She hasn't turned up to pick me up from hospital, and I instantly knew. I knew something was not right. I went down, the car was there, so I knew she was in the flat, shouting through the letterbox, like Leanne stuff was shouting through the letterbox, no response. But I know that Nikki was very down and depressed about her mum being poorly, and she was really worried something was going to happen to her. And sometimes Nikki was the type of person that does need to be just left alone for a little while. It's very unusual for her not to contact people. So I thought, you know what, we'll give it a night.
But the next day, there is still no word from Nikki.
She's usually very reliable. Her family trust her, they rely on her. So they're concerned. Her half-sister obtains a spare key to her flat and goes round with other members of the family.
With Nikki not responding, her family let themselves into the flat. But nothing could prepare them for what they would find.
They walked into the kitchen, and in front of them, they saw Nikki on the floor in a pool of blood. Her left wrist had been slit.
They found Nikki laying on the floor, her face up, with, there was just like a massive congealed blood running from Nikki's head. And yeah, you could see that she was dead.
Family members went down to her flat to see if she was okay, and obviously discovered her body. At that point, they immediately called the police.
My daughter phoned me up hysterical, saying, Nikki's dead, there's blood everywhere. And I just went hysterical on the phone, and then I was in shock.
Police immediately arrive on the scene, to be met by a gruesome sight.
In this case, the senior investigation officer will be looking to preserve that scene, preserving and securing evidence.
Nikki is laying on the floor of her kitchen, fragments of a ceramic chicken-shaped pot surrounding her. A severe cut is across her wrist. Could she have had an accident or taken her own life?
It was so bizarre, and there didn't seem to be any particular reason for it.
It was suspected that Nikki had took her own life, but I knew that that wasn't the case. She'd never have done that. She loved life too much. She would never have left her mum and her family.
As Nikki's body is taken for a post-mortem, the tragic news travels fast through the close-knit community, alerting the local press to the scene.
When the police arrived, the area was cordoned off. There were police cars everywhere, officers in white suits from the forensic department carrying out checks. Local people at the shops and the flats were shocked by what had gone on.
It's not something you hear about in, you know, the area that you live. It's not something you expect on your doorstep.
She was so friendly with everybody around here. It was sad when we heard about what happened to her. She wouldn't hurt anybody. She was the most kindest person I'd ever known. It was devastating news.
When the post-mortem report comes in, the results are not clear-cut.
From the pathology reports, there's no one single injury that led to Nikki's death. It was inconclusive.
But the results do reveal Nikki's skull had been fractured. And it seems the broken ceramic chicken-shaped dish which had surrounded her body was involved.
So the pathologist said that the chicken dish would have been picked up by two hands and used with considerable force. Although it wasn't enough to fracture Nikki's skull, it certainly was enough to render her unconscious.
The police quickly realised that somebody else had been involved.
The pathologists have concluded that she died because of the violent actions of a third party.
No one could have predicted that this was going to happen. We just couldn't believe it. It was just so, it was like it wasn't even happening to us.
With the outcome from the post-mortem now in, the inquiry into Nikki's death changes focus.
She's been murdered.
In Letchworth, results from the post-mortem on 26-year-old Nikki Collingbourne has changed the course of the investigation.
They walked into the kitchen and in front of them they saw Nikki on the floor in a pool of blood. Her left wrist had been slit.
Chicken dish would have been picked up by two hands and used with considerable force. It certainly was enough to render her unconscious.
With a murder investigation now underway, police break the news to her grieving family.
I was at work. I got a phone call from my boyfriend at the time, and he just said, "You need to get home right now." He goes, "I can't really tell you anything. I don't want to tell you right now." But I knew, and I was so panicky. When I got there, there was police everywhere. It was, not very good. And my children were there crying. My mum was there crying.
And I was like, murder? What do you mean, murder? I honestly didn't think, even in that moment, that it was murder.
Just unbelievable. It's like you're in a movie. It's not even happening to you. Yeah, everyone was just shocked, devastated.
News that Nikki's death is now being treated as a murder quickly spreads around the area.
When I first heard about the murder, I think it was just generally shock, because you don't expect that to sort of happen where you live.
I was really amazed, really surprised, because it's a really safe area, and it really shocked me.
It took a long, long time to take it in. We knew the relatives who knew them, and so sorry for the family, you know.
With family and locals still trying to come to terms with the murder, the bigger question being asked is who would want to harm Nikki?
She works with children. That was just what she wanted to do for her whole life. Just work with children, be a mum, and, she had a great relationship with everyone.
I loved everything about Nikki. Everything. She was just a beautiful person. There's nothing she wouldn't do for you. She'd cheer you up. She'd get you motivated, because I don't go out a lot. She'd come in, she'd do stuff for me. She's like the little sister I never had.
Her family was her life. And we saw her almost all the time. I'd open my door, my son would be gone into her house, and I wouldn't see him for days. Just to text her to make sure, is my son okay? And she's like, yeah, don't need to worry, he's here.
She literally brought so much joy to anybody that met her, really. She just kept us all together. She was the glue that kept both sides of the family together, really. She was just a really amazing, one of those people that you meet and you're like, wow, she was put on this earth just to care for people. She was just amazing.
I was honestly shocked when I found out who the victim was. So I honestly had no idea why anybody would want to harm her.
With no clues as to who would want to harm Nikki, forensic officers take a closer look at her flat, turning the block into a major crime scene.
Police officers in white suits were gathering vital forensic evidence. The whole scene had been cordoned off. It was a major crime in what was usually a quiet area.
a murderer will either leave something at the scene or take something away from the scene. So we're looking to preserve and secure that evidence. And that evidence will be DNA, fingerprints, blood, hair, fibres, etc. So that they're looking for the physical evidence. A forensic examination of the scene was carried out, and DNA, essentially blood, was found on the broken pieces of the chicken pot.
While the evidence is sent off to the laboratory for examination, further searching at Nikki's home uncovers something concerning.
A letter was found in Nikki's flat in which she'd written to her GP saying she was absolutely terrified.
The letter throws up more questions. Who could Nikki have been afraid of? And could this person be behind her untimely death?
Nikki unfortunately got a lot of threats, and Nikki was terrified. I've never ever known anyone so absolutely terrified. I remember one night she barricaded her door up.
Yeah, she was very withdrawn. She was just scared.
Police need to piece together Nikki's last known movements, including trying to ascertain whether anyone visited her.
There was no sign of a forced entry in the sense of, for example, the door having been levered or a broken window or anything of that kind. The only way that you could get to it, it was quite secure, was by entering the door to the common parts of the purpose-built block and then going up the stairs and onto the landing and approaching the door of Nikki's flat.
So when looking at a murder investigation, the priorities at the scene could be different for different murders. For example, a killer has to have got there and then gone away from the scene. So it could be fast track, looking at the CCTV. It could be speaking to family members, or it could be house to house because somebody could have seen the killer leaving the scene.
All at the entrance and the landing on the first floor were covered by CCTV cameras, and as it happens, the system had been recently improved, and once the police got access to the CCTV, they recovered a whole series of images of events occurring at the door of the flat between the Sunday evening when Nikki returned home and the Tuesday evening when members of her family finally let themselves in.
After accessing the CCTV footage, police spend hours trawling through the images.
When the police reviewed the CCTV footage, they saw a person entering the flats. That person was wearing a high-vis jacket.
The CCTV shows a figure in a ginger curly wig, large frame glasses, with a King Charles I beard and a high-vis jacket lumbering along the corridor.
The person is seen entering the flats just before 8:30 a.m. on Monday the 23rd of May and leaving just before noon, corresponding with the pathologist's time of death.
That person immediately becomes a person of interest because of the time they entered and left the flats. But also the CCTV showed that that person went to Nikki's door.
Who is the person on CCTV wearing a high-vis? Could it be a workman or a boyfriend?
When you've got the CCTV, you don't know who that is. However, you look into the victim and their background, and if you find out how a victim lived, you may find out how they died.
She didn't have a boyfriend, she was waiting for that one special person.
With police still at a loss, they turn to those close to Nikki.
The police called me up and asked me to go into the station to help them with something. But after I got off the phone to them, I was like, a bit like, well, I was the last person to see Nikki. Like, all these thoughts were, you don't even think you're going to think like that, but all these thoughts were running through my mind. I thought, I was the last person to see her, I was the last person to talk to her. What if they think it was me?
Me and Jodie had been called up on the Thursday or Friday by the police at the headquarters in Welling, and they said, oh, would you and Jodie, we want just you and Jodie to come and view some pictures for us. And we were like, oh, okay. And we were like, well, we don't really know anyone around here. We only know our family, so I don't know what we're going to find. Like, we just didn't know what we was going to expect.
So me and obviously Leanne drove there, and we got there and they separated us both. And they basically took Leanne into a room, and then took me into a room, and I didn't quite know what I was here to do. And they just like, we need to show you some CCTV images. Just say what you think, if you know the person, say.
And we kind of sat in this room and had a camera on us. I filmed the whole thing of me watching video footage of someone in a high-vis.
I honestly felt like passing out when I see it, like within 3 seconds of watching the clip. I actually had to stop halfway through watching it. I was in such shock. I was crying, screaming. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it.
And I was like, I don't even think that's a man. I think that's a female dressing up as a man. I knew straight away that Jodie was going to identify her.
I just knew that it was Yvonne.
The murder investigation into the death of Nikki Collingbourne has thrown up a suspect. A man seen entering Nikki's flat at the time of her death. But when CCTV is examined closely, family members recognise the person. And it's not a man.
When I see that first image of her dressed up the way she was, it just all hit me. I just knew that it was Yvonne.
But who is Yvonne?
So Nikki and Yvonne were sisters. There was a big age gap between them, about 27 years.
I first met Yvonne when I was dating her brother Paul, who obviously I later married, and we became friends. We used to go to the pub. Yvonne went to live in America, and basically I didn't have anything to do with Yvonne for years. She was estranged from the family.
Having moved to the US in the early 1990s, and due to their age gap, Yvonne and Nikki had not grown up together. But keen to get to know her half-sister, Nikki moved to America.
I did meet her when I went to America a couple of times. I kind of had my reservations about her, and she's quite in your face when she talks. She makes everything about her. She's quite manipulative.
She was quite boisterous. She would certainly punch you if she wouldn't think twice about it.
Despite the family's reservations, in 2015, when Yvonne came to visit family in the UK from the US, Nikki repaid the favour, letting her sister move in with her.
Everyone was just shocked to see her back in the UK, but at first we were happy to see her because she's part of the family.
The pair living together came as a surprise to family, since Nikki had shared something with them on her return to the UK.
Yvonne and Nikki's relationship was very strained when she came back because they'd had a big fallout before Nikki came back. And then obviously Yvonne followed about, I think it was a year later, but Nikki forgave her and they made it up, and that's how she ended up living with Nikki.
With Yvonne Kaler having been identified as the person in the CCTV, and with her being deemed the last person to see Nikki, and therefore a suspect, police need to ascertain what could have gone wrong in their relationship.
I have no doubt in my mind that Yvonne was jealous of Nikki and their relationship that she had over the years with their dad.
Yvonne was very jealous of the relationship that Nikki had with their dad because she obviously lived in America and Nikki lived in England and she grew up with her dad, and I suppose, you know, she was in with all of us lot, and Yvonne didn't have that relationship with us. We only had that over the internet.
because obviously Nikki felt obliged to have Yvonne there because they were sisters, and Nikki was very much a family person. Yvonne definitely manipulated her and used the fact that they were sisters.
Nikki and Yvonne Kayla's relationship was anything other than tranquil. It was difficult and tempestuous.
But could this strained relationship between the half-sisters have led to Nikki's death? In order to piece the puzzle together, police need to ask some questions. So make a decision.
Yvonne Kayla was arrested on the 25th of May, 2016. Once we got the suspect in custody, and we believe that is the killer, the clock is ticking. So we've got to do everything we can to get enough evidence for the CPS to authorise a charge. Because certainly in this case, if Yvonne Kayla hadn't been bailed, she was a risk to other people out there.
Because obviously they had Yvonne, they'd arrested her for Nikki's murder, but they had no evidence to hold her. They had this CCTV image, and DNA takes time to come back, so they couldn't actually hold her.
With Yvonne in custody, police trawl her mobile phone and laptop and discover she had been searching for flights.
The police discovered she was planning to drive to Spain and then fly out to the United States to meet her husband.
She was planning to flee the jurisdiction and fly back to America. Those arrangements had, as it were, begun in the immediate aftermath of Nikki Collingbourne's death.
She was a flight risk. We know she was planning to go back to the USA.
Her mobile phone revealed she'd even sent messages after news of Nikki's murder broke.
Yvonne Kayla was pretending to be as concerned and upset as every other member of Nikki's family. She sent a message to her husband in the United States saying, "Pray for Nikki, as I will."
While piecing together Yvonne's movements in the days leading up to Nikki's murder, further revelations come to light.
She had visited the costume shop where she acquired the wig and the disguise and the false beard the preceding week. So there'd been clearly an element of planning about all of this.
We believe she's planned this murder meticulously, so she's an extreme danger to the public out there.
Police build their evidence against Yvonne Kayla, but at this stage it's purely circumstantial. So the focus turns to questioning Yvonne while in custody.
Yvonne, do you recognise the person in that CCTV?
Look, bow-legged, fat, bow-legged to me.
Even though it could be clear that the person on the CCTV is Yvonne, Yvonne is denying that that is her, and that is not enough on its own to convict somebody of murder.
It was almost like it was a joke. Like she had padded herself up with some sort of padding, and she had a high vis on, a moustache, it looked like she'd bought in a joke shop, a wig and a goatee. And it was the most surreal. I can't to this day even look at it, like, I literally can't believe the way she dressed up and how she thought she was going to get away with that, because you can clearly see that that is her.
When I heard that Yvonne had dressed up to get into the flat, I was just gobsmacked. Never have even thought of anything like that.
Well, I couldn't tell if it was a fake beard.
Do you own a fake beard?
No, I don't own a fake beard.
Do you own a fake wig?
No, I don't own a fake wig.
By denying her presence on the CCTV, Yvonne was trying to achieve the smoke and mirrors that she'd of her plan. She wanted the police to believe that this was a man, and in fact, in a police interview, she tells the police officer that she thought it was a man who was bow-legged. Again, this was just part of her callous plan.
I'm fat, but I'm not bow-legged. I look like a man to me. I couldn't see his face.
What do you think looked like a man?
Just what they're wearing looked like a dude.
Then there is a breakthrough in the case. Results have come back from the forensic lab which had been analysing the blood found on the broken chicken pot.
The breaking of the casserole pot at the moment that it was used to strike her had quite clearly cut the hands of the person who was holding it at the time, because on some of those ceramic pieces were found blood, the DNA of which did not match Nikki Collingbourne, but which did match that of Yvonne Kaler.
I knew in my mind Yvonne has murdered Nikki. I just knew.
Yvonne Kaler was quickly charged with murder.
Well, of course
Why
they
would
knew.
you think that's me?
Because to me, it looks like the person's wearing a wig and a beard.
Well, I don't know about a wig, but they look like they had a beard.
We suspect that person
Is
has
me.
murdered your sister.
Well, it ain't me, because I ain't going to be able to push on that door like that.
Yeah, you said, we believe it's you. You said it's not you.
I know, you can't believe you think it's me.
Having been charged with the murder of Nikki Collingbourne, Yvonne Kaler maintains her innocence, but is remanded in custody until a trial date is set. Nikki's body is released, so she can finally be laid to rest.
Nikki was loved by so many people. At a funeral, there were so many people there that obviously I knew, and so many people had travelled from all over to come to her funeral. They'd all bought pictures of her, like at the nursery with the kids, and they all put it on a big board, and it was lovely.
But the funeral brings more devastating news for the family.
Nikki's mum, Rena, it destroyed her. She was like, she died, did it like a day before the funeral. She didn't even get to bury her daughter.
With overwhelming evidence stacking against her, Yvonne Kaler has been charged with the murder of Nikki Collingbourne. Having pleaded not guilty, Kaler's trial begins at Luton Crown Court.
The main issue in the case was the identity of the person who had been captured on the CCTV forcing their way in. Because Yvonne Kaler's defence to the charge of murder was a perfectly simple one. It wasn't me and I was elsewhere at the time.
As the case opens, Nikki's family take to the stand.
I think I was one of the first people to give evidence, so I couldn't actually go and sit in the gallery until I'd given my evidence. I just remember when I did go in that obviously the very first person I did see was Yvonne. She was just smirking, trying to make me feel uncomfortable.
And they reveal a major fallout between Nikki and her half-sister Yvonne when the latter came to the UK to visit family for a few months.
Yvonne had been at Nikki's for a few months. They'd had a few bad days, a couple of little rows, and either Yvonne or Nikki would end up in my mum's house, which is where we resided at the time. And, you know, we could kind of see the tension, you know, getting a bit more.
So I think they lived together for a very short length of time, like 5 months. But in that 5 months, a lot happened. Like, a lot happened. Yvonne was literally trying to manipulate Nikki into doing everything for her. It was like she was using Nikki, basically. She was just using her.
So when Nikki told us that she was going to evict Yvonne, we were ecstatic, really, because Nikki had been in a bit of a state for a couple of weeks, maybe a little bit longer.
Tension arose between them whilst they were living in the flat, and Nikki Collingbourne asked her to leave. On the day of her departure, there was unpleasantness between them, and Yvonne Kaler made a complaint to the police that Nikki Collingbourne had assaulted her. And the police came to the flat and they arrested Nikki Collingbourne, and she was taken to a local police station. having interviewed her, it wasn't long before I think they realised that there wasn't any substance to the complaint, and she was released from custody, allowed to go home, and in fact nothing further was ever done in respect of that complaint.
But whilst Nikki was busy explaining herself to local police, it seems Yvonne was taking her revenge for being evicted.
While Nikki was being questioned, Yvonne paid a locksmith to break in, basically. She proved that she'd lived there because obviously she had paperwork to say that that was her address, but obviously she wasn't on the tenancy. And so the locksmith, he had no idea, because she was very manipulative. She just pulls the wool out over everyone's eyes.
Whilst Nikki was in custody with the police, Yvonne stole loads of stuff.
Once inside Nikki's flat, it seemed Yvonne stole some of her half-sister's belongings, something Nikki discovered when she arrived home.
Well, she immediately reported what had taken place to the police, that her sister had let herself in to what was Nikki's home without permission, and Yvonne Kaler was arrested as a result of that complaint.
But Yvonne seemed determined to wheedle her way out of trouble.
Yvonne Kaler was now in big trouble. She was facing a burglary charge and a trial at a Crown Court. She approached Nikki's ill, elderly mother in an attempt to persuade her to say that the property that she'd taken belonged to her.
She was subsequently charged with offences of burglary and doing acts tending and intended to pervert the course of justice, and those proceedings, that case was due to be tried at the Crown Court at Cambridge.
While awaiting her day in court for burglary, Yvonne was released on bail on the condition she didn't contact Nikki.
She breached those conditions. She would phone her up, try and make contact with her, and did so in such a way as to cause considerable alarm to Nikki.
Nikki was certainly living in fear of Yvonne due to the burglary and perverting the course of justice.
I think she was just hoping that Yvonne would get on a plane and go back to America and just leave her in peace, because wherever she went, she was always looking over her shoulder, and yeah, it wasn't very nice for her to see her like that. She'd gone completely within herself. She's not bubbly anymore.
Yvonne's trial for burglary and perverting the course of justice was listed for May 23rd. Her half-sister Nikki was due to give evidence against her, something which police believe made Yvonne carry out her deadly plan.
Yvonne Kaler is a very controlling and manipulative person. She likes to be in control. However, once she's charged with burglary and perverting the course of justice, the court process is out of her control. So to try and wrestle that control back, she's been very, very callous in planning and executing the murder of her stepsister.
The court hears how on the day she was due to stand trial for burglary, Yvonne donned her disguise and entered the flat where Nikki lived, approaching her door.
Then this shocking scene of the door being opened, and what we surmised from the way that she was dressed and the towel and the half-full bath is that Nikki had been in the bathroom with a towel wrapped round her with just her underwear on. She was preparing to have a morning bath. She heard the doorbell go. She opened the door, and as she recognised it was her sister, she would have been really frightened and shocked at the realisation of seeing that, although it was her sister was disguised in this bizarre way, and I think she would immediately have known that she was in really serious danger. And there was a struggle at the door. And as you watched it, there were that awful couple of seconds where it looked as though she was just about to get the door shut, before finally it was forced open and Yvonne Kaler went in, and then the door shut behind her. And then 2 hours of nothing.
Once inside the flat, the prosecution claims Yvonne and Nikki argued in the kitchen, and as Nikki turned to walk away, Yvonne attacked her.
The chicken dish would have been picked up by two hands and used with considerable force, and Nikki would have been walking away from that. Certainly was enough to render her unconscious.
Then Yvonne panicked and tried to stage the scene.
There's been an attempt made to make this look like a suicide. So there was injuries to Nikki's wrist to make it look like she'd self-harmed. There was also a big tidy up of the flat, and including the staging of placing a dustpan brush in Nikki's left hand.
Having tried to make it look as though Nikki had cut herself on the broken pot and bled to death while trying to clear it up, Yvonne is once again caught on CCTV leaving the flat.
She was carrying some plastic bags that she hadn't had with her when she arrived, so she clearly had some property in the bags. One of the things which we consider she did when she left and which was in the bag were some of the remnants from the casserole pot that had been used, because one of the things the police did was they put it all back together again. It was like a 3D jigsaw. But what it demonstrated once they'd done it was that there were a number of the pieces missing. We surmised that she'd realised that there was her blood on the broken pieces, and she had taken those which she could find with bloodstains on them in the plastic carrier bag. But unfortunately for her, unfortunately for us, she left a couple behind.
When Yvonne Kaler was shown the CCTV footage, her reaction was one of denial.
Yvonne, do you recognise the person in that CCTV?
No, look, bow-legged, fat, bow-legged to me. I'm fat, but I'm not bow-legged. Looked like a man to me. I couldn't see his face.
As the trial progresses, Yvonne continues to deny her involvement. Then the prosecution calls a new witness.
Actually, the worst moment thinking about it through the trial was when they brought prisoner to give evidence against Yvonne.
We found out that there was a prisoner that Yvonne had spent some time with while she was on remand. She was going to be released quite soon.
She decided to draw a map of my flat and try and bribe a prisoner that was being released to set fire to my flat, knowing that my daughter was living here at the time with my two grandchildren.
She had this idea that if she gave her some of her DNA, I think it was blood, on a cotton bud or something, that she could leave the evidence there and set fire to it and say, well, someone's trying to frame me, because how would my blood be at a scene when I'm in prison? So someone's obviously framed me for the murder of Nikki.
But Yvonne's bizarre plan to try to suggest she had been set up for the murder didn't sway the jury. With all the facts presented to them, including the CCTV footage and the DNA evidence, the jury retires to consider its verdict.
So at one point in the trial, I honestly thought it was going to go the other way. It was like almost like her defence was like making it kind of out like she couldn't have possibly done this, and like honestly, we honestly thought at one point maybe she's going to get away with this. Honestly, it's a really scary feeling. Even though we knew all the evidence was there, it's convincing that jury that she did that.
On December the 19th, 2016, Yvonne Kaler is found guilty of murder and sentenced to life with a minimum of 20 years.
Yvonne Kaler could have accepted the burglary charges or gone to trial on the burglary charges and let the jury decide. But she decided not to. She hatched a plan, cold, calculated, and she killed Nikki Collingbourne rather than face a trial for burglary.
When the guilty verdict was read out, I think there was the biggest sigh of relief to to know that she was going to be locked up and that we would just never have to have anything to do with her ever again, and that we could then tell our children that this bad person is now in prison and she can't touch any of us anymore.
After Nikki passed away, people would come up to me and say how sorry they were, and they'd always have a memory of her helping them in some way. She would literally go out of her way to help people. She loved to make people happy, and that's what Nikki lived for, because seeing other people happy made her happy. I can't explain. She was just such a gentle soul.
Experience the power of science to crack a crime. Forensics Catching the Killer is new Friday at 9 on Sky Mix.
Was enough information to make the motive fit for Donna. Everything else had been conjecture for the most part. It had been her son saying that they were unhappy. But when you could read it in black and white, you could read her notes, you could see the fixation she had with this other woman. The fact that she was calling her husband Mr. Meanie. This childlike language. That is the type of evidence that is difficult to discredit as a defense counsel.
We firmly believe every case that we prosecute and believe the evidence supports the argument that we just provided to the jury and why the person should be found guilty. We want justice for Radley to be vindicated. We want justice for the community to know that this person was held accountable. So you're always on pins and needles in that moment. There's just a lot going on, a lot of emotion.
On June the 12th, 2017, Donna Horowitz was sentenced to 32 years in Lowell Correctional Facility for the murder of her husband, Lanny Horowitz. It's highly likely she'll spend the rest of her life behind bars.
I think that Donna was in a fury. She was angry, and she had been in a relationship with Lanny for the majority of her life, and he had been cruel to her over and over again about the fact that she was constantly wanting this love and support that he was not giving her. They've been married, divorced, remarried, divorced, and then he uses her to get the money to help assist the mortgages, and he doesn't stop his relationship with Francine Tice, and he continues to it. So he is outright ignoring her feelings, and she is envious of what Francine Tice has with him. These fancy dinners, these trips, and all of these positive things that a person would look to in a normal, healthy relationship, all the positives that she is not getting, and she is just getting the mean side of Lanny, the Mr. Meanie who's not considerate of her feelings.
Why not just walk away? But maybe at that point she had just had enough and walking away wasn't an option.
So does the trial provide a resolution for the Horowitz family?
There's no way that justice could be had. Some could argue what the injustice is, but from the narrow definition of a murder, how do you ever get justice back from that? It's impossible. You look at the aggrieved parties. You look at Radley. How can he ever receive justice? His father's dead. His mother threw him under the bus and allowed her defense attorneys to claim he was a murderer. How do you ever go back from that? There's no way. There's no justice that can be had there. His whole existence has been shattered. For his family, it's shattered. You have a whole family that no longer have grandparents. He doesn't have parents. Friends who are without their companionship. There can be no real justice, I don't think.
woman is found savagely murdered in her vehicle.
She had a horrific injury to her hand. It almost took her thumb off.
Her name is Tracy Mondabaugh, and police suspect the ex-wife of Tracy's current boyfriend. Her name is Michelle Boat.
She unleashed hell on Tracy that day. She was just not able to deal with her marriage falling apart.
I think in her head, she felt that if she removed Tracy from the situation, that Nick would come back to her.
It doesn't take police long to find out just what their suspect has been up to.
Michelle had been following Tracy around town for quite a while that evening. She stalked Tracy and then killed her.
And Michelle's own words provide damning evidence.
And tell the she messed with the wrong mama.
Every one of the things that she did was a free will choice, to the point that she plunged a knife into Tracy's heart.
This is the story of Tracy Mondabaugh's murder and how it was solved. The story of a determined killer driven by rage and by jealousy. May 18th, 2020. Police in the city of Pella, Iowa, receive a call about a possible domestic dispute.
Pella Police Department.
Yeah, I live over at 21 Glenwood. I just went outside to smoke a cigarette, and what looked like a scuffle between a couple. Well, when I saw her get out of the truck, her face is just all bloody.
Do you have any idea what apartment she might have went in?
No, she looked like she just got in the car and left. Looked like a Cadillac, almost cream or light-colored off-white.
She witnessed what she thought was a domestic incident, and a couple people arguing in the parking lot, and then when one of the people came around the corner, the witness said that she was covered in blood. And so that obviously was very alarming.
Shortly afterwards, police arrive on the scene.
Pella Department ambulance. I got someone that's laying in the driver's seat of the pickup. Doesn't look like they're responding. Lots of blood. Bleeding from the hand. Really large open wound. Ma'am, are you awake? Hello?
They found a body. They didn't know exactly how long it had been there, the extent of the injuries, and so they attempted to perform CPR. It was unsuccessful.
You start to look at the area around her body, and you could see that there was a struggle. Her purse had been knocked out. Some of her personal items, her teeth, she wore dentures, were on the ground as well. And then you could barely see into the cab of the truck, but you could see immediately that there was a tremendous amount of blood.
Using her driver's license, police are able to identify the victim as Tracy Mondabaugh. Police are soon able to find out more about Tracy.
This whole thing was a tragedy. She had people that loved her and for the most part have been living her life, well.
Her children described her as a very loving mother and a very nice person, just kind of trying to figure out her way through life.
Tracy had been dating Nick Boat. He is separated from his wife of over 20 years and works at a local industrial and agricultural supplier, Vermeer Corporation.
Her family was happy that she had met Nick and that Nick treated their mom well.
He had begun seeing this woman while married to Michelle Boat, and at some point he told Michelle that he was leaving her to go live with Tracy.
I believe he described it as the love of his life, and that he now, for the first time in his life, knew what love really was.
So Tracy and Nick moved in together, and the truck was Nick Boat's truck. Tracy had dropped Nick off for work, had the vehicle that day, took him lunch from Burger King, and had come back to their apartment after dropping off and having some lunch with him.
This was the last time Tracy was seen alive. Crime scene investigators begin to examine the scene and look for evidence.
Well, first and foremost, when law enforcement arrived and the Pella Police Department were wearing body cameras, you could tell that the victim was still seatbelted in. That was important, at least from my perspective, because it demonstrated an ambush attack.
It is also clear that there has been a violent struggle.
You can tell Tracy fought back. She had a horrific injury to her hand. It almost took her thumb off.
She had what many people refer to as defensive wounds on her hands, and then she had a single stab wound to her chest.
According to our medical examiner, that puncture of her heart terminated her heart from beating, and so it was just mere seconds, I think. Probably less than 30 seconds, and I hope for Tracy's sake it was shorter than that.
One small but vital clue catches the attention of the police.
At the crime scene, they had found what looked like a finger off of a blue latex glove. Just the finger looked like it had been ripped off of the glove.
Everyone, whether or not it's law enforcement or the EMT crews, firefighters, they wear purple gloves. So the fact that we had a blue glove at the scene, this stood out to us.
Investigators also learned something of enormous interest from some bystanders.
There was a male and a female standing outside, and he told me that a lighter colored, he couldn't remember, silver or white vehicle with a Vermeer sticker in the front windshield had left the scene before the officers arrived.
Through his dealings with Nick and Michelle, Lieutenant Cox immediately put it together that that was Michelle Boat's Cadillac, which was a critical blessing that Lieutenant Cox was able to put that all together very quickly.
Armed with this information, investigators are now able to track down Michelle Boat and pay her a visit.
She lives probably less than 1.5 miles from the crime scene. When they knocked on the door, not a whole lot happened initially because she didn't answer the door. I think by the body footage we were able to calculate that it's about a 5-minute knocking, pounding on the door, pounding on the side of the house.
You could see inside the residence. The blinds weren't pulled on the windows. They were wide open. Lieutenant Bigowet went to the driveway and was looking around the Cadillac. He put his hand up to the wheel of the front wheel of the car and said that the brake rotors were still warm. He could feel the heat coming off the rotors, which would tell me that the vehicle's been driven fairly recently.
Find a phone number for Michelle Boat and call her and see if you can get her to answer. The rotors on the Cadillac are still hot, but nobody's coming to the door. I can see through most of the house and don't see anybody.
So I went around the side of the house and I noticed that there was a light on I didn't know what the room was. I thought maybe it was a bathroom. So I pounded on the side of the house, on the siding of the house.
I think she's in this bathroom back here. I can see a little bit of movement, but I can't. The blinds are pulled.
About 30 seconds after that, Lieutenant Bigowet yelled for me and said that she was coming to the door. So I went to the front porch of the residence.
83, I just confirmed with Marion County. They have the same number.
Hello. Yes, I was in the shower. What do you need?
Police have caught up with Michelle Boat. She appears calm and collected. They know they need to find out if she's connected with the murder of Tracy Mondabaugh. In Pella, Iowa, police have begun an investigation into the brutal murder of 47-year-old Tracy Mondabaugh. The main person of interest in the investigation is Michelle Boat, whose silver Cadillac was seen leaving the scene of the crime. Police have arrived at Michelle's home, and after some time, she's finally opened the door.
same number. So we're the number she looked at.
Yes, I was in the shower. What do you need?
She opened the door and said, "Hey, what's going on?" And I asked her if she could step out first, and then I changed my mind because she was in a robe and all that. I asked her if she minded if we stepped inside the residence.
She claims to not know why they're there. She was just taking a shower. Ultimately, officers go inside and speak with Michelle, and she told them that she didn't know anything about what had happened to Tracy.
They knew differently. They knew that her car was seen leaving the scene. Additionally, Deputy Bigowit goes and looks at the vehicle. There's blood on the outside of the vehicle, and the brakes on the vehicle are still warm. So we knew her story, what she was telling us, didn't match the physical evidence at the scene.
Police moved to secure Michelle Boat's residence.
They were obviously very concerned about maintaining anything of evidentiary value because, at this point, it's really looking like Michelle Boat is a person who might have been responsible for Tracy's death.
I went into the basement first, and there was a storage area, pretty decent-sized storage area in the basement of the house. And that was where I heard something. I couldn't see much. It was pretty dark. I had my flashlight, and I couldn't find a light switch.
And you got to imagine, if you're an officer going down there, you don't know exactly what's going on. You're walking into pitch black. He actually hears the machine going, and it somewhat startles him.
I heard some movement back in the darkness, and I just announced, "Police department, if you're back there, come out." And nobody came out, so I continued forward and realized that the sound I was hearing was the washing machine.
But the contents of the machine proved to be of interest.
There's just one outfit in the washing machine, which is a little peculiar. Nobody usually washes just one pair of pants and one shirt or whatever. So he noticed that, and that ended up being a crucial piece of evidence.
Police believe they have enough to warrant them taking Michelle into custody.
Michelle Boat was in custody within 20 minutes. There wasn't the concern that we have a killer on the loose or that this was a random act of violence.
We decided to arrest Michelle Boat on a violation of a no-contact order that night, and that was brought on by, I went to Vermeer Corporation and requested to look at their security footage. When I was reviewing that, I found video of Michelle Boat's silver Cadillac following the red F-150 that Tracy was driving. The video shows Michelle sitting in the same parking lot as the victim and Nick and watching them for about a half an hour. And then once the truck leaves, Michelle pulls out and follows the truck. Shortly thereafter, we got the phone call at the police department of the situation that was going on. That was when we started putting together that this is first-degree murder because she had this planned out. She stalked Tracy and then killed her.
The investigators now call in the Division of Criminal Investigations, known as the DCI.
Certain law enforcement agencies, and especially in smaller communities, don't have access to all of the things that DCI does. And so when we're able to make a phone call to them when something like this happens, we inherit a wealth of resources for the investigation.
Just knowing that people that deal with these types of situations on a more regular basis are able to come and back us up on a case like this is a huge relief when you're in the middle of this situation and wondering what the next step is.
When I arrived at the Pella Police Department, I already knew that we had 2 crime scenes at that time. Several search warrants were already underway, and Michelle Boat was already at the police department.
It is time to question Michelle in depth.
Michelle maintained that she didn't have anything to do with the injuries that Tracy had to her chest or her hands. She claimed not to have seen Tracy that evening. Michelle maintained that she had just gone out to get some food, realized that the line was too long at the burger place, and turned around and came home. But that she had nothing to do with the murder at all or anything that happened to Tracy.
To the police, Michelle Boat's reactions are more than strange.
When ultimately law enforcement tells her that Tracy has been hurt severely and Tracy is dead, Michelle gets this eerie smile on her face. And she looks at him and goes, "Oh, I guess the Lord works in mysterious ways." And to me, that was such a telling comment.
It was incredibly chilling. That statement just showed to me a complete lack of remorse for what had happened. That in some ways, I think, was her saying that, that she was somehow justified in what she did because this woman had interfered with her husband.
As a prosecutor, I immediately thought that's something we're going to use at trial. As a human being, I thought, wow, that's really this woman's mindset.
Police are also uncovering more about Michelle and her life.
She was kind of a normal person, best we could tell. She had worked, she lived in Pella, she didn't get arrested until the times leading up to this.
She never stood out to me as somebody who would go this far. In my dealings with her, she was always she was loud. She was a yelling at the top of her lungs type of person.
Something happened with her that drove her to a really dark place, and that she was just not able to deal with her marriage falling apart.
Michelle and Nick had been married for 20 years.
It was a loveless marriage for probably more than a decade, and had turned south in a hurry. He had told her that he wanted out of the relationship, that their marriage was over, and he, in fact, moved out of the home. And at that point, he said she became very angry with him.
She was so used to Nick doing whatever she said that when Nick finally left and found somebody else that made him happy, it was more than she could handle.
She largely had no criminal history, but then in the months leading up to the murder had kind of started popping up on Pella Police Department's radar. She assaulted Nick at one point, which resulted in a protective order being in place, and then Michelle continued to violate that protective order.
I think for 50-some years she was just an ordinary person. But there was certainly something lingering inside her that caused her to, and I'm not even going to say snap, because I don't think she snapped. I think she did exactly what she wanted to do. She absolutely had the personality of a sociopath who was driven and wasn't going to stop until she achieved her goal. And that was the death of Tracy Mondabaugh.
Investigators now have their prime suspect in custody. As they put their case together, Michelle's motive starts to become clear: jealousy. In May 2020, in Pella, Iowa, detectives are learning more and more about the events surrounding the murder of 47-year-old Tracy Mondabaugh. They have Michelle Boat, the estranged wife of Tracy's boyfriend Nick, in custody. Pella police have called in the Division of Criminal Investigations, and Agent Elizabeth Miller is now at the center of the inquiry.
One of the first things that Special Agent Miller did was recognize that she wanted to get photographs of Michelle Boat's body. And so we photographed Michelle Boat head to toe. And at first, there was a slight wound to one of her fingers, a laceration, but barely visible to the human eye, and a little bit of discoloration. And she had a small laceration on her face, but literally that was it. It was not anything that would lead you to believe this person was just involved in a violent attack.
But there is more to come from the examination of Michelle.
About 36 hours later, on May 20th, is when I took the second set of photographs. At this point, you could see a large bruise on her upper arm, and just more injuries were apparent than they were the day before. Bruises can take a little while to show up. So when I don't see an injury from the first set of photographs, and then the second time that you go and document someone's body, and there's a whole set of injuries, it says that there was an altercation.
Police seek permission to conduct a search of Michelle's home.
A team of law enforcement go in the house and searched it thoroughly. You know, obviously we were looking for a knife or some kind of sharp object because we were thinking that that may have caused the death. Obviously we didn't know for sure at that point, but anything with blood on it or hair.
A calendar in the house tells its own story.
Tracy was documenting the amount of days that Nick had left her. It went from 1 day's gone to 69 days gone. She was definitely keeping track of how long he had left.
The examiners make an extraordinary discovery on Michelle's vehicle.
One of the things that was unusual, when we look at the vehicle that Michelle Boat was driving, attached to the windshield wiper was a black choker necklace. And inside that choker, or weave through it, is Tracy Mondaball's hair. So during this struggle, somehow, Michelle Boat must grab at Tracy's neck, pulls the necklace and tosses it. And for whatever reason, and I'm glad it happened, it attached by the magnet that held it together to her windshield wiper and made it all the way home, still attached.
It just all fit what exactly had happened. That there was obviously a violent struggle, and Michelle at some point threw the necklace towards her car.
And there is more in the car which supports the investigators' developing case against Michelle Boat.
There were several pieces of evidence which suggested that Michelle Boat didn't just decide in some moment of rage that she was going to kill Tracy. I mean, first of all, she had everything that she needed for murder in her car. Rubber gloves, binoculars, there's a few other things in there that clearly showed that Michelle Boat was thinking about doing something bad.
But police are about to find the most damning piece of evidence.
Lieutenant Bigwit noticed that when they were in the bathroom that the toilet kept running. That caught his attention, and I believe he lifted the top of the tank, saw something in there. It was a towel with a set of rubber gloves with one fingertip missing. I went to the crime lab straight away from the scene, and then just like the rubber glove tip from near where Tracy Mondabaugh's body was found, those were taken to the lab too and matched. And you don't need a medical degree to look at the rubber glove and see that it fit the tip that was found at the scene.
That absolutely connected the crime scene with Michelle Boat's residence. It was a perfect fracture match for the tip of the latex glove at the crime scene and the glove found in the toilet tank at Michelle's residence.
Police are still searching, however, for one elusive piece of evidence, the murder weapon.
We walked for miles around this town. We worked long and hard trying to find that weapon and were never able to. We did take some knives from the residence that could have been in there. I'm not sure, but I would like to know where the knife was.
The investigating team dig deeper, and they find out much more about Michelle and her motivation.
There was quite a bit of digital evidence. Michelle Boat was convinced that Tracy Mondabaugh was the source of all of her marital problems. I think that she had worked herself into some view of what was going on, that if Tracy were gone, that her life would be normal again. I think in many ways, Michelle Boat believed that she was the victim in this circumstance, that someone had come and taken her husband, and she was not going to allow that to happen.
Michelle somehow found Tracy's ex-boyfriend on Facebook and sent him a message saying, hey, you should go get your girlfriend back. She's with my husband, and if you go get Tracy back, then I'll get Nick back. I think in her head, she felt that if she removed Tracy from the situation, that Nick would come back to her.
Even her phone calls from jail, when she originally gets arrested, she's totally confused by why Nick hasn't visited her at jail, because Tracy's gone now. Where else would he go? Of course he would come back to her.
Michelle's stalking had become an obsession.
There was evidence that Michelle had been trying to track Tracy down. She followed Tracy one time to Ottumwa, and the police had to be called down there. So it was clear that Michelle was interested in knowing where Tracy was, and she was clearly filled with rage towards Tracy.
When you lose your identity and potentially lose your a major source of your income, you feel helpless and discarded, and everything you've built your whole life around is gone. And so that's her rage. She couldn't let it go.
When voice messages from Michelle to Nick surface, it's clear that Michelle's intense rage had reached a dangerous level, and that her behavior had become unpredictable.
You know, ignoring me isn't going to do you any good. Because sooner or later, I'm going to find and I'm going to kill her. And then you're going to feel the pain that I feel right now. Being over after 20 years of marriage. Well, a woman scorned.
They were awful. Michelle had left, I think it was something in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 voicemail messages, and Nick had chosen to save them.
They were from weeks earlier, all explaining that how upset Michelle was about Nick leaving and dating Tracy, talking about Tracy in a derogatory way, and quite frankly, laying out her plan, and that was to harm Tracy.
I don't think you have any idea what I'm capable of. And neither does she. Because she's going to die. One way or another. I'll kill her. Might take me a little while. I'll do it.
You know, these messages sometimes are just 15 seconds of screaming. Sometimes she's played songs. And sometimes she's talking. And when she's talking, the voice messages made everyone in our office, the hair on the back of your neck stand up.
I can't wait till I find her. Oh, man, she's going to pay.
It's not just the words, it's the tone, the hate, the anger is palpable, and it's chilling.
The motivation was clear, and that was that she definitely wanted to harm Tracy and, do serious harm to her.
She messed with the wrong mama.
Police have their killer. Now they need to piece together the events that led to the jealousy-motivated murder of Tracy Mondabaugh. Police in Iowa are continuing their investigation into the murder of 47-year-old Tracy Mondabaugh. They've arrested Michelle Boat, the estranged wife of Tracy's boyfriend Nick. Now they're trying to piece together Michelle's movements on the day of the killing.
She maintained she had left to go get dinner, and then when she got to the drive-thru at the Culver's, the line was too long, so she drove back home. The problem was, she was missing about an hour from her timeline. Her story just didn't make sense.
I believe that Michelle Boat had decided she was going to kill Tracy. She didn't know exactly when or where, but It was something that had been growing in her mind over the course of those 69 days since Nick left, and especially since the time that she realized that Tracy was part of the equation. And so I think probably that evening she did go to try to get something to eat, and she noticed the truck. She saw who was driving it, and I think at that point she just realized, this is my chance.
The CCTV footage which police recover becomes key to progressing the investigation.
We ended up, through investigation, finding that Michelle had been following Tracy around town for quite a while that evening. It started at Burger King.
Tracy pulls into the Burger King drive-thru at 7:20 p.m.
Michelle followed Tracy to the Burger King and parked in the parking lot of the strip mall a ways away, so Tracy would not have noticed her. You can see her on surveillance footage from the Burger King and from the Culver's surveillance footage get out of her car and then go to the trunk compartment.
Michelle Boat had, as we called it, kind of a murder kit. She had rubber gloves, she had a hammer, she clearly had a knife, she had a crowbar. She had all of those things with her in that vehicle. I think some of those things were located in the trunk of her vehicle. That's why, while she was waiting for Michelle, she got ready. She armed herself. She prepared. She followed her.
The next stop is the Vermeer facility where Nick works.
You first see Tracy pull in to Vermeer, and then less than 40 seconds later, Michelle Boat pulls in.
What we see is Tracy pulling into the parking lot, driving the truck she was found in, and meeting Nick. And Michelle pulls in sort of behind them. Our theory was she was trying not to be detected by Nick and Tracy. Michelle was sitting there watching the whole time. She waited a half an hour and watched them eat dinner. He kissed Tracy goodbye, and they parted ways, and that was the last time that he ever saw her.
That's what fueled this whole thing, is the realization that this is really over. In that moment when she realized it was really over, having seen them in that parking lot and having a passionate kiss that Michelle hadn't had from him in years, and that was the kindling that lit the fire.
The vehicles leave, and once again, Tracy's vehicle pulls out of Vermeer. Michelle is following. And then just down the road, probably half a mile or so away, there's security cameras on the backside of a church that identify both vehicles driving away.
Tragically, police believe that the final stop is murder.
From all the evidence, it appears that Tracy Mondabal pulls into the parking spot, turns the car off, but before she unhooks her seatbelt, she's attacked. At that point, we believe that Michelle Boat, clearly wearing gloves and armed with a knife, attacks, and at that point, that's when the eyewitness, and what I call kind of the sound witness, hears what's going on.
Tracy was found still wearing her seatbelt, and that to me was one of the most critical pieces of evidence because it was very telling about what had happened. Knowing that Michelle Boat was still in her seatbelt told me something I think that was critical, and that was that this was all one altercation, that there was no break in the fight, that likely when Michelle Boat approached Tracy, that she had a knife with her, that she didn't leave to go get the knife or leave to put rubber gloves on, that she approached with the knife, and I think that really said a lot about her intent, what she meant to do when she got there.
DNA evidence allows investigators to connect all the dots.
We were able to use DNA to tie the two separate areas of town together through the DNA from the crime scene to Michelle Boat's residence and back.
That's what linked her to the scene. There weren't any eyewitnesses that could tell who she was. So yes, the DNA was very important to that aspect.
Michelle Boat's vehicle had a piece of jewelry with magnets on it. It was like a choker, and that had black hair that came back as Tracy Mondabaugh's DNA on that hair. There were blood splatters all over the side of the Cadillac and in multiple different areas around the car that all came back as Tracy Mondabaugh's DNA.
The rubber glove was found wrapped up in a towel in the toilet tank. It did have Tracy's blood DNA on it, and it did match up with the rubber glove tip that was found at the crime scene, which also had Tracy's DNA on it.
Tracy Mondabaugh fought like hell. She had inside her hands Michelle Boat's hair. So her ability to, even in death, be certain that she was going to bring her killer to justice, she fought back, and she fought back in a way that allowed us to use what she found to advance our case.
As police prepare their prosecution for trial, they believe they have a very good case.
Once we saw that she followed Tracy, that and the nature of the attack, the fact that we had a knife used, it was close combat, for lack of a better term, and multiple stabs, because we knew that there was the injury that killed her and the injury to her hand, that in my mind this was murder in the first degree. This was premeditated homicide with malice aforethought. Every one of the things that she did was a free will choice that she made on her own, to the point that she plunged a knife into Tracy's heart.
I'm gonna kill her. The that you're sleeping with, she messed with the wrong mama.
All of the evidence that existed in this case, and you didn't have to believe all of it. You could just believe any one of it, and you would find Michelle Boat guilty.
This physical evidence, it eliminates the plausibility of being able to argue that your client wasn't there or that this wasn't them. That was when we knew we had to pursue a manslaughter defense or a lesser included defense.
Given the relationship between the parties involved, the trial was always going to be an emotional one.
She kept it together fairly well. And I'm not going to say she was persuasive, but she was at times sympathetic. I mean, you're married to a person for 20 plus years, and they all of a sudden tell you, somewhat out of the blue, blindsiding you, that they want out of this relationship. And while you still are dealing with the emotions of maybe I can win that person back, you realize they've already moved on to someone else. I think for Michelle, it was just too much, too quick, and she wasn't going to tolerate it.
I think at that point she was still playing a part. When we were testifying, there was not a whole lot of emotion. When she testified or Nick testified, there was a lot of emotion on her part, or what appeared to be emotion.
I think that Michelle did the best she could to try to manipulate the facts into what would help her, but given what I knew about what the evidence was and what she said, they didn't coincide with each other.
The jury reaches a guilty verdict within 45 minutes.
I felt relieved more than anything else, because I think the truth is that Michelle Boat killed Tracy Mondabaugh, and she had planned it, and she meant to do it. And just to finally have the jury say, that's what we think happened too, it was a good feeling.
Having a first-degree murder verdict is always a great form of justice. However, it still took a loss of life to get that verdict.
Sentencing was about 8 weeks later, give or take, and honestly, I think it probably took less than 15 minutes, which was amazing. And Michelle Boat is now going to spend the rest of her natural-born life in prison.
Michelle receives her sentence. But was justice done in this case?
I think justice exists. If it didn't, my job would be meaningless if I didn't find that there was justice in it. But in order to get justice, something bad has to happen.
In a sort of cold way in my job, the file's closed. So there's that, but I bet if you ask that question to Tracy's family or Nick, they probably have a different answer for you. I'm sure they're probably still dealing with a lot.
There's nothing that any of us can do to bring Tracy Mondaball back. That's what would be justice, is be able to snap your fingers and all of a sudden bring a person back to life. But to the extent of what we're allowed to do under our criminal justice system, the jury got it right. Michelle Boat's exactly where she deserves to be.
I think Michelle made a choice to take the life of someone she deemed was a threat to her marriage. She did not show any remorse. I don't know if I would say cold-blooded killer, but I don't think that she feels bad about what she did.
It's just a reminder to me that people who are seemingly normal, seemingly, good people, can be capable of really bad things. It's so hard not to just think, what if? What if Michelle just would have taken a second to breathe and turn her car around that day, that Tracy'd still be alive? It's sad to see how all of the circumstances came together for Tracy to lose her life.
The murder of Tracy is a case with jealousy at its heart, solved by a dedicated team.
I would describe this case as good old-fashioned police work. The way that Pella PD was so quick to find Michelle and to take control of that situation.
It just shows that even in a town like Pella, very small compared to a lot of towns and cities, and we don't deal with this very often, but when we do have something like this happen, we're still able to step up and take care of the job.
You don't ever forget the murder cases. You don't forget the big ones, and I think that's absolutely true. I'm going to remember Tracy Mondaball for the rest of my life.
October 12, 2016, Newcastle, England. A young woman is brutally murdered inside her home.
Please, I've just come back to my flat and the door was locked, so I crawled through the window and my flatmate's covered in blood in the bathroom.
Police respond to the scene and a murder investigation is launched. It becomes apparent that the victim has previously been in contact with the police.
You could hear in that call the sheer terror in her voice.
It says at the bottom he won't contact me, this will be the last I hear from him, but he's said that a lot of times and he never does seem to stop.
Police immediately identify the victim's ex-boyfriend as someone they would like to interview.
Every case of murder is terrible, but this is one that will live with me for my entire life. I've never encountered a case with a defendant so callous and manipulative.
He basically just would not accept that the relationship was over.
If he couldn't have her, nobody could.
This is the heart-rending story of Alice Ruggles, how her killer's escalating behaviour should have raised red flags, and how tragically her death could have been avoided.
I don't think I've ever encountered a case when there were so many missed opportunities to stop him killing Alice and for Alice to be protected.
This is the worst stalking case that I have come across.
There's this horrible pause where it dawns on her that he's not going to be arrested.
Christmas Eve 1991, Leicestershire. Alice, a beautiful baby girl, is born to Clive Ruggles and Sue Hill.
We live in a small village in Leicestershire. It's called Langton. There's only about 150 people live here. We've lived here since all our children were born. We were a close-knit family. We had 4 children, and Alice was the third of our 4 children.
Alice was bubbly, cheerful. She wanted to be everybody's friend, and when she was a young teenager, she was the person everybody wanted to be friends with, and so she'd walk in the room and she just attracted people, and she just was very, very happy.
She always had this incredible empathy. I can remember that even from a fairly young age. She'd sort of work out how you were thinking and what you were thinking, and if you were depressed or something. And she'd, if she detected that, she'd come out with some ridiculous joke or anecdote. She'd always be trying to cheer you up. And she'd succeed. And she became one of those people who would lighten things, and she would come into a room full of people and there was a bit of an atmosphere. She'd just get everyone going and laughing. So she had a real talent. Empathetic was the word. Alice was very close to her elder sister Emma. They would do many things together as sisters do. They had different interests, and Emma was always very good at sport, and Alice always liked sport, but she struggled to find a sport that Emma wasn't inherently better at. And she eventually found that. She went on a PGL course when she was about 11, I think, from school, and discovered fencing. And Emma had tried it once and hated it. And I think that may have been a motivation for Alice, but whatever. But she actually got really, really good at fencing, and she started to train, and she became eventually a member of the East Midlands squad, youth squad, and would travel around doing fencing matches.
She absolutely loved fencing, and she decided that was going to be her thing. After a couple of years, she was the Leicester champion for her age, and she won the competition for that. A couple of years later, she won the adult competition for Leicestershire as well. She was also the East Midlands champion for a long time as well, so she's quite successful at it. And it was such an important thing in her life that was how she chose where to go to university. So instead of looking at where does the course I want to do best, she was looking at where does the course I want to do, but also has a very, very good fencing club. And that is why she ended up at Northumbria University in Newcastle.
When Alice decided to go to university, she was influenced in, I think, where she was going with a degree. She was in a family with kind of scientific engineering side. In fact, most of our others landed up in different fields of engineering, effectively. Alice decided, because she also had this artistic flair, she decided that she was going to do a degree in product design, which sort of mixes soft engineering with the sort of artistic design side. But once she got to Newcastle, she discovered that she loved the place. And so she did her 4 years of her degree there. But when she finished, she decided that Newcastle was somewhere she wanted to stay.
She then got a job with Sky working on the telephone. So her job was to pick up the phone and try and persuade you that actually you didn't want to cancel your subscription. You actually wanted to subscribe to Sky Sports and Movies Plus or all the other things that you needed to do. And she did enjoy that job too, because overall Alice was a people person. She loved talking to people and getting to know them and being with them. Alice was very happy. It was interesting because she liked to be in a relationship with someone, and when she was working at Sky, she wasn't in a relationship with anyone, but she was totally happy with how she was, and that was a really good sign that the job was right for her, because it didn't matter that she wasn't in a relationship. It just meant that she could get on with life. You know, at one point we're sort of seeing it that she's at the absolute peak of her life because everything's going well. She's really happy, her job's going well, she's got a lovely flat, she's sharing with some people she likes, she's got so many friends that she just was really happy.
She always loved the idea of travelling, and she got the opportunity in 2015. A friend of hers, Jen, was planning a trip to Sri Lanka. So she spent these 2 weeks in Sri Lanka with Jen. And she absolutely loved it. And they had a lovely time. And of course, being of their age and generation, they were sharing pictures and other things on social media. Now, Jen had a friend at university who still followed her on social media, and his name was Truman Dillon. But he messaged Jen to say, "Oh, I've seen your friend, and could you put her in touch with me?"
He was looking at the Facebook photographs that Jen posted on the holiday, and he messaged her and said that the girl she was with was the most naturally beautiful person he'd seen, and could they introduce them? And at the time, Dylan was a serving soldier, and he was actually in Afghanistan on a non-combat role. I thought that this was someone Alice had met and was actually seeing quite a lot of, but in fact, Alice hadn't met him. And this happened in October, where they started talking on Facebook, and they got on really well and chatted a lot. And he was obviously quite lonely because he was a soldier serving abroad, and so it was nice for him to chat to Alice.
When Alice came home for Christmas that year, we got the impression that he was a boyfriend, the way she talked about him. What we didn't realise, that she'd never actually ever met him.
Alice and Dylan's relationship accelerates quickly, and there are troubling signs.
The relationship is becoming very intense very quickly, bearing in mind they've never physically met in person.
It wasn't until January that they actually met face to face, and yet by December, Alice had changed her Facebook status from being single to being in a relationship.
Christmas Eve was Alice's birthday, and even on her birthday she was concerned about staying in touch with him, and I think he sent her a couple of messages about seeing other people, which upset her rather.
And I remember her saying, I said to her, you know, "Where's Jen? Have you seen Jen recently?" And she said, "Oh, I'm not friends with Jen anymore." She said, "We had an argument." She said, "Harry says I must never speak to her again." And that rang a massive alarm bell for me, that, you know, that's not right at all, that someone should tell you who you can be friends with. What I didn't realise was that Dylan had actually engineered the argument between them, and he'd fuelled it, and it was a really effective way of isolating her from her friends.
January 2016, Newcastle, England. Online daters Alice Ruggles and Truman Dillon meet for the first time in their 3-month relationship. Dylan is on leave from his army tour in Afghanistan.
He came down to Newcastle and stayed with Alice for a week, and she said they had an absolutely wonderful time, and that he was lovely, and he took her out, and he was very gentlemanly, and he paid for things. And then they had a week in Edinburgh, and they had a lovely time there as well. They saw all the sights of Edinburgh, where Alice had never been before, and it was a lovely time.
Certainly after they'd spent those 2 weeks together in January, I think she was besotted with him.
Alice rang me at that time and said, "Mum, he's just amazing. I actually think he is the one."
When Dylan finishes his tour in Afghanistan a few months later, Alice brings him to meet her parents.
We first met him together with Alice. It was on the Maybank holiday weekend. You know, he was a personable enough lad.
Truman had been brought up in India. He was of a Sikh background.
He was an only child. He talked about there being servants to the family, so they're obviously reasonably affluent. But he also talked about how spoiled he was. And he did say, "I always get my own way. I always get whatever I want." He was obviously quite westernised because his Indian accent was barely present, and I was actually quite surprised to discover he actually was Indian because he just sounded like he'd lived in Britain all his life.
He was at university, I think, in India, then finished 2 years of his university education in the UK, in Edinburgh.
He joined up with the British Army because that was the only way that he could stay in Britain.
This clean-cut image, this is somebody who's got a responsible job. He's ticking all the boxes in terms of his career, notwithstanding his occupation and his background, you know, in terms of how he is with Alice, the positive comments, the praise. This is a good, decent person.
I remember when he left the house that we both said to each other, "What do you think then?" And Clive said, yeah, he was just trying to say what he wanted us to hear. And that was really good description of what he was like, in the sense that he just wanted us to think he was going to look after Alice and he was going to be kind and nice to her.
That first weekend, everything was fine, but they came down again for the second bank holiday weekend. And by that time, only 3 or 4 weeks later, things seemed to have changed a little bit. And it was odd because I remember the fact that he spent an awful lot of time trying to buy a car on his phone and basically ignoring her. And she was visibly upset by that. That, I suppose, was the first sign that there's something not quite right here, because he wasn't giving her the attention that you'd think he would, especially in front of her parents. He just seemed to be kind of absorbed in his own thing.
As the relationship continues, Dylan's behaviour becomes more cruel.
He'd quite often make not very nice comments about her, so comments about the fact that she had a big nose and that she had hairy arms and all sort of things that he was really trying to undermine her confidence.
They're spending all their time together, and friends and family have noticed that Alice isn't sort of available in the same way that she was previously, not going out unless they're together. Things weren't as happy as they perhaps should have been or were initially. They're using each other's devices, tablets, phones. You know, so he has access to Alice's iPad or tablet or phone, and of course any accounts that are on there legitimately at the time.
Dylan's behaviour is becoming increasingly more jealous and controlling.
I remember Alice saying, "Mum, he rings me up every morning and he wants me to send a photograph so he can see what I'm wearing. And that sounds lovely and caring." And that was how Alice saw it. She'd message him from a party and saying, "I'm at a party, you know, it's really lovely." And then he'd come and pick her up and she said, "Mum, it's really lovely, he just wants to see me. He's just come down, driven all this way from Edinburgh to see me." And so when you're in a controlling relationship, it's quite hard to see that. It's quite hard to think, actually, I'm being controlled here. Dylan said to Alice, he said, "Don't worry, I've got some money. I'll buy a flat that you can live in." And this was another worry for me, because in my mind, they'd only just started this relationship, and there's something wrong with someone saying, "I'm going to buy a flat for you to live in." It just didn't sound right at all. But fortunately, Alice found somewhere to live with a friend from work, and so she didn't end up living in his flat under his control.
A good way to describe his behaviour is one of possession. And of course, you don't possess people, you possess objects. And when we start to see those signs that somebody's becoming dehumanised, I own you, you are a possession, you are chattel. It starts to open up those ideas about power, control, ownership. We start to see this bind being created in a relationship, where people's vulnerabilities, their niceness, their good nature is sort of used against them in the most abhorrent way. And we start to see those signs, changes in Alice's behaviour, arguing with her friends, falling out, losing weight, not being this happy person that she previously was. Something is going wrong here.
It's difficult as our family, because when we look at Alice, we don't see someone who's controlled. We see a really strong, independent, lovely, bubbly person. How can that person have been controlled? And it's really hard to accept that that might have happened to her.
It's hard to conceive how affected someone must feel in that situation. I mean, every moment of your life, in every different way, this other person either knows where you are, who you're with, or they might know. I mean, this is now controlling your entire life, and that's how it was for Alice.
24-year-old Alice Ruggles is in a relationship with Tremont Dillon. The couple visit Alice's family in Cornwall, and Alice reveals that Dillon has been keeping secrets.
The family have a history, long-standing tradition of going on holiday, I think, to Cornwall.
Alice had decided she'd had enough of him before that holiday started. And the reason is that Alice had a message on Facebook from somebody who she didn't know, who said, there's something about your boyfriend you need to know, and that he's been on Tinder and he's looking for other girls, and he found me and he wanted to go in a relationship with me. So I looked at his Facebook and I found that he was in a relationship with you, and you need to know that that's what he's doing.
She had found out that he was speaking to other girls using dating apps and Facebook because somebody contacted Alice. By the way, I've seen that you're in a relationship with this person, and FYI, he's been contacting me.
And Alice tackled him about it, and he first of all denied it completely, and then he said, oh, somebody else had set up a fake account. His story had changed again, and he knew exactly who it was, and he'd done it because he didn't like Alice and he wanted to cause a rift between him and Alice. And I remember Alice saying, I don't think he actually knows what the truth is, Mum. I don't think he even knows what the concept of truth is. He just says whatever he thinks you want to hear at that point.
Alice did end the relationship. That was the line that was crossed, if you like. But this wasn't a clean, amicable break. This was anything but.
He basically just would not accept that the relationship was over. He basically messaged her all the time. So her phone would be buzzing and then buzzing again and then buzzing again.
It was relentless. It was constant.
Dillon at this point has been rejected. And to somebody like him, a narcissist, rejection is hugely insulting.
Dillon is stalking Alice online, and given his knowledge of her conversations, she believes he's hacking her social media.
He did pretty much had unfettered access to her Facebook. I think he also had access to WhatsApp through the web-based service as well. So he's privy to who Alice is communicating with. He's privy to conversations between Alice and her mum, Sue, via WhatsApp. And of course, they're discussing things, her thoughts, her feelings, and also her other online activity. Who is she looking at on Facebook? Who's she communicating with? And actually, she is speaking to another male on Facebook.
Alice had been starting a new relationship with a man called Mike, who was a colleague of her sister's.
And almost instantly, Dillon found out about this, and Alice had told nobody about it. She'd only talked to Emma about it. So how did Dillon know?
He says, I know you belong to another man now. So it's a very clear sign that he has dehumanized Alice. Mike knows everything. Alice, has explained the situation. And when Dillon contacts him, saying that Alice is cheating on him, it tells you something very clear about what he thinks. This is far from over.
Alice's new relationship is another trigger, and Dillon's behaviour escalates again.
It was Emma, more than any of us, who began to think of this as stalking. We didn't know about the level of danger that was involved in this. We, like Alice, assumed that at some point he would just give up and move on and go away. As soon as the control within the relationship is broken because the relationship is ended, then the perpetrator needs to exert that control in other ways. It's a trigger that actually makes the need for control worse. And of course then the stalking is an attempt to regain that control.
Alice has never been in a situation like this before. She tries to be reasonable. She tries to be nice, to let somebody down gently, to appease them. But that isn't working. Dylan had in his possession intimate photographs of Alice and used these as a way to threaten her. This is to coerce her, to blackmail her, if you like, back into a relationship. If you don't get back with me, I will publish these images. All your friends and family will see the type of person you are. Now, for Alice, who's got loads of friends on social media, for private images like that to be published would have been devastating.
Dylan's sinister behaviour continues when he deliberately scares Alice when she is home alone.
On the 30th of September, Alice is having a night in. She's not going out with her friends. She gets a weird phone call from him telling her that he's in the garden. And Alice said, "What, my garden?" And he said, no, some gardens in Edinburgh that they'd visited. And Alice thought that was really strange. And then a little bit later, the doorbell rang. And when she went to look, there was nobody there. And that kept happening. And she was really, really unnerved at this point. And she's been quite anxious about locking the flat, making sure all the windows are shut for quite a long time because of the way he's been behaving. Eventually, she goes to bed. And when she goes to bed, she hears this knocking on the window. And so she opens the curtains. And he's standing there having put some flowers and chocolates on the windowsill. And
Không, cái dàn âm thanh ở trong máy ảnh nó tăng. Nó lên 3 cọc.
Đấy sao? Cái bắt âm thanh á? Ô lên sạc rồi đấy.
Mày xem.
24 đến 26 rồi đấy.
Mày xem nó có sập nguồn nữa không?
Thỉnh thoảng cho nghe vài lần cái xem nó khô đi không. Mẹ cứ bảo cho nghe, cứ nghe một lần xong
Nó khô loa chứ nó có khô bên trong đâu.
nó đẩy hết ra từ đường loa ra má.
Sao mày, tao tưởng nó chỉ khô loa thôi. Mày lừa tao.
Thì nó vào, nó không vào được đường nào ngoài đường loa.
Đường sạc. Đơn tốt nhất mày để tao ngồi im trong phòng nhé, mày đừng cho tao đi đâu nữa nhé. Vân nhé. Này mà chúng nó cho tao uống rượu vào nữa thì thôi, mất kiểm soát đấy. Sợ lắm Vân ơi, vận đen bùng phát thì thôi mà. Uống về tao sẽ bịt mồm vào nha. Vân nha. Tao nghĩ chỉ do tính của mình thôi ấy. Đỏ đen gì?
Ôi mẹ ơi, bình thường mình làm thế nào cũng không biết.
Thôi mà do cái nét mình đi cũng vụng đi. Quay gì? Hả?
Chị đang quay cái đấy, cái âm thanh này nó in vào đấy ấy, tại vì hai cái máy nó bắt âm thanh đấy mà. Nó phát ra để cao vãi, nghe in vào đầu ấy.
Mình sẽ chuyển sang bước tiếp theo là tô phần nhụy. Của cái bông hoa này thì mình sẽ lấy màu nâu. Đây, màu nâu của mình để tô vào giữa này nha.
lên nữa này. Vừa sạc vừa xem thì lên.
Đáng sợ quá. Mày sẵn sàng đi sửa máy cùng ta chưa? Ừ? Để dùng dưới gối ấy. Bước tiếp theo mình sẽ chuyển sang là tô phần lá cây và phần thân cây này nha. Mình sẽ tô phần lá với màu xanh nhạt.
Tại vì cái tiếng này nó là tiếng hắt xét cao ấy thì...
Còn thân mình sẽ tô màu xanh đậm hơn nha. Nghe như kiểu tiếng xe máy ấy. Tiếng xe máy xong rồi một lúc sau nó sẽ giống cái tiếng mà chói loa ấy. Sau khi mà đã tô phần thân xong, mình sẽ lấy màu xanh lá nhạt hơn để tô vào phần lá của cái bông hoa hướng dương này nha.